Good evening and welcome to the August 8th, 2023 meeting of the Milton Select Board. Before we begin, please join us as we recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That item 3 is public comment. Public comment, by policy, we allow 15 minutes for public comment and 3 minutes per speaker. That is the current policy. We're going to actually discuss that policy tonight, and whether it should be longer or whether it should be changed at all. That's the current policy that we abide by, and it's. Are we okay? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Forgot my mic. Do I need to repeat anything? Probably not. We're good? All right. The current policy, 15 minutes for public comment, 3 minutes per speaker. And we had some speakers who didn't have a chance, and we have speakers both who are present here and joining us through the internet. So last meeting in public comment, we had some people who were lined up who weren't able to speak because we ran out of time. So I'm going to ask on the honor system if there was anyone from the previous meeting, either online. Please raise your hand if you were here previous, or we'll see one gentleman here. So we'll start with you, sir. Anyone else here that was in line last meeting that didn't get a chance to speak? I don't see anyone online raising their hand. So. All right, so having said that, now we're going to start with this gentleman, and then everyone else can line up, and we'll go back and forth between live audience, well, they're live, but here in person audience, and through the magic of the internet. So, and what I'm going to ask you to do is sign up on the sign-up sheet, put your name and address, state your name and address, just so everybody knows who you are. Colin Loisel, who's our new assistant town administrator, who I should have introduced first, new assistant town administrator. He is going to keep the 15 minutes, and I will keep the 3 minutes. So somehow we'll try to make it all work out. So why don't we start with you, sir, and let me just get my timer going, and I won't start until you've started with your substantive remarks.
So comfortable?
All right.
My name is Mark Bristol. I live on Waldo Road off of Elliott Street, and I'm here today to support the letter of reclassification of Milton on the MBTA communities from rapid transit to an adjacent community. I think it's time to reclassify Milton an adjacent community. After all, Ashmont is the terminus, which sits outside of the town limits. Thank you. I guess I could be heard now.
Yep.
Do I need to start over or just continue?
I think we got it here anyway.
The Mattapan trolley is clearly not rapid transit. It is distinctly dissimilar from rapid transit. It is a small standalone loop, slightly more than 2 miles in length. It provides transport for passengers no further than Ashmont, which is the southern terminus of the Red Line's rapid transit corridor. As such, the small trolley with very limited carrying capacity only feeds into rapid transit service, just like a bus. The Mattapan trolley does not provide passengers with direct transport into downtown central nucleus because it has no ability to do so. That is atypical of a rapid transit line. By contrast, all passengers on every one of the MBTA's rapid transit lines are provided with direct transport into downtown, always. This is a critical difference. The process of utilizing the Mattapan trolley as a medium to downtown entails multiple wait times as well, the use of different vessels, and a disconnect with lapsed service for comparison's sake. In 1969, as was mentioned at the last meeting that we had here with the Select Board, the MBTA abandoned plans to convert the Mattapan trolley to rapid transit. Nothing has changed since, except that the required transfer at Ashmont is a lengthier and more cumbersome process at the new Ashmont station. You actually have to disembark outside the station, walk into the station, down a flight of stairs onto the rapid transit platform, which takes time. Fast forward to June of 2023, and the MBT has confirmed via the Mattapan refurbishment program that they had a Zoom conference that they will not be integrating the Mattapan trolley into rapid transit. Milton could only be classified as a rapid transit community if the Mattapan trolley were to be integrated into the Red Line's existing rapid transit system. That would require seismic changes of the trolley's route in order to accommodate larger rapid transit trains on their journey to a new terminus at Mattapan.
About 30 seconds.
Okay, think of the massive infrastructure, the loss of 3 stations, both at Cape and Valley and Central, and a viaduct that would have to separate the at-grade crossing for street level from the third rail rapid transit. In my opinion, to base a housing agenda upon a false rapid transit premise is not equitable and it's wrong. A rapid transit classification that at its heart supported solely by a small, antiquated, short route with no direct passage downtown, delivering inferior service and limited carry capacity, does not compare to what the 11 rapid transit communities do enjoy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
And I
Appreciate it.
I do ask for your cooperation in sending that letter out.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. Anybody online, Mr. Loisel, at this point? Or should we just go ahead with someone else here? Anyone else here who wants to get up for public comment? Yep, just come along and maybe we'll go to this woman and then to you, sir.
This is not from last week.
No, I don't think, are you from last week, sir? No. Oh, okay, all right. I think we just had one from last week.
And I'm making a statement on behalf of the butters, and we are all kind of coming up.
Do we want to pull up the chairs? I hate to have you standing up. Do you want to? You all right? Yeah. Okay, all right. It's only 3 minutes anyway, so. Yeah. Okay, right. Got it.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, and if you just state your name and address.
I'm Maggie Wilson, 21 Woodlot Drive. So thank you for having us. I'm the president of the Milton Woods HOA, and I'm joined here by representatives from Quissit Brook, Indian Cliffs, and Governor Stoughton Lane, as well as many residents from those communities here in person and on the Zoom call. So we are the abutting neighbors to the town farm, and we've come here together to express our interest in your agenda as the trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust. We are here to respectfully request 2 things. First is public engagement and input regarding use of the parcel, and 2 is additional thought on the RFP before it's released. On number 1, public engagement, we see that there is a public hearing on your agenda for tonight, and for that we are very grateful. We ask that you provide sufficient notice to the abutting communities and do have that public hearing. We'd like for you to hear those comments before releasing any kind of an RFP. We also ask that we have opportunity for continued engagement with you outside of the public hearing for future town farm discussions. And then on number 2, the RFP, we've read the RFP, and there is seemingly critical pieces of information missing from that document, such as stormwater and infrastructure updates that would be required for the development on the site. We request that the town address those issues in advance of an RFP going out. I will highlight just a couple of concerns raised by our neighbors regarding the RFP and proposed development on the site. The first is access. The RFP is silent on access, but if Governor Stoughton Lane is proposed, then there are resident safety issues and infrastructure problems. Governor Stoughton does not currently allow for 2-way traffic. There are no sidewalks, and town utilities directly abut the road. We request that the town engage a traffic engineer and its own planning board to determine the feasibility and scope of the work required to accommodate construction and ongoing traffic onto the site. Second, water management. There's a history of flooding and drainage problems surrounding the site that were exacerbated when the Milton Woods community was developed. Those problems should be fixed in advance of any future development. And additionally, the residents of Milton Woods are responsible for annual inspections and maintenance of their own stormwater system, and any future development should require a similar system to prevent runoff into all abutting neighborhoods. And along with those 2 concerns, neighbors have set forth many others, and I'll just highlight a couple. Density and height specs in the RFP, environmental impacts on wetlands and other conservation land, keeping a buffer of trees around the site, use of emergency access into Milton Woods and Quissit Brook,
30 seconds.
Preservation of historical buildings and rock walls, and understanding how the animal shelter fits into this development plan. In abiding by my 3 minutes, I don't have time to highlight all of the issues that have been raised by the community, but that's all the more reason for you to approve a public hearing and let everyone be heard. And we'd like to continue conversations with you on the best use of the parcel for the benefit of the entire town. Thank you.
Perfect timing, Ms. Wilson. Thank you.
I practice.
All right, let's try again with our hybrid folks. to see if nobody yet. So anyone else this gentleman right here, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, and I hope I can do as well on my time as you did. I'm Jeff.
Well, we'll make sure you do.
Jeff Wilkinson, 199 Beacon Street, Precinct 10, and one of the co-founders of Affordable Inclusive Milton, an organization that advocates for affordable housing, and we have dozens of members around town. I'm speaking on behalf of myself right now, but I'm a strong supporter of affordable housing, and I want to speak to two issues you'll be considering tonight. First, Town Farm. Appreciate the progress that the board has made on developing affordable housing on Town Farm, and I fully support that effort, and I appreciate you're going to hear from two members of the Affordable Housing Trust later, so I'm not going to try to get into details about that. I want to speak a little bit, though, about the proposal to reclassify Milton as a rapid transit community. I'm disturbed that the idea for this reclassification seems to arise from efforts to develop strategy to avoid compliance with the law. It's a creative effort, but it strikes me as something that's likely to get swift state rejection. And I hope that we're not stalling ourselves on the track, and that's a pun intended. I've attended 3 of the hearings that the town director of planning and community development has organized. I'm really impressed with the progress that Tim and his team are making, and I think we should move ahead with that, and I hope that the select board will provide strong leadership and not be distracted by this effort to reclassify. I'd like to see Milton be a regional leader on addressing the regional affordable housing crisis that we've helped to contribute to through the years through exclusionary zoning. This is not just a matter of threats for access to or loss of access to state funding. It's not just a matter of the potential for civil rights lawsuits against the town, but it's also a matter of how we're perceived in the larger Boston regional community. I see the MBTA Communities Act compliance as an opportunity for us to shine. Why should Lexington, Brookline, and other communities have all the fun? We deserve our own leadership headlines. I think developing affordable housing on Town Farm in compliance with the MBTA Communities Act are ways we can demonstrate honor, leadership, commitment to equity, and our determination to build a sustainable future for all of our residents, our youth, our working families, our seniors, and I've become one of those over the years, and in all of our diversity. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. Appreciate it. All right, anyone online? And how much time do we have on our 15 minutes, Mr. Lizzo?
So I have 6 minutes.
Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? Oh, all right. No, that's all right. We want to hear from as many people as possible.
Hi, Linda Champion, 19 Aberdeen Road. I just want to also express my support. As stated by Jeff Wilkinson, one of the things I did complete about a year ago now was an 18-month study on affordable housing, its impact and the lack thereof in the town of Milton. I believe that the town of Milton did have a requirement under 40B to create affordable housing, has for over 30 years failed in that endeavor. I think that the individuals, at least from my standpoint, most people and most families do not have adequate housing. We can't provide housing for our own public servants who support us, whether they're in the school district or right in town hall. I am an empty nester, so at some point my child will be returning from college, and I would love for her to be able to own and live in the community that she was born in and raised in and attended all the schools. I would just prefer that not to be on my sofa. And so, and at the same time, I haven't quite reached senior age as Jeff has, but I can see that is in the distant future. And if for whatever reason I don't have the ability to age in place, I would like to be able to afford somewhere to move into. I think the idea of the town farm, and I'd like the select board to be cognizant of this, is that it was intended to be used to support the poor. And I can think of no better way than to apply affordable housing to that site and to look for ways that we can be creative in that endeavor. So I would ask that, definitely have the public comment period, but certainly come into compliance with the law and the mandates that the state has set forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Champion. All right. Seeing no one on the online, and we have, I think, time for at least one more. So, Mr. Humphreys.
Thank you. Okay, Jackson Humphreys, 34 Hoy Terrace. Thank you all for all that you do for the town, and I would like to echo actually many of the sentiments of the past two speakers. Milton has an obligation to follow the MBTA Communities Act as written. And I would like to highlight the incredible work that our town planning department has been doing in pursuing modeling and statistical analysis of that project. That is extremely important. I would like to support the, Mr. Chairman, your sentiment in that we need to pursue two paths as a town. One towards full compliance under the model, the mandated 2,500 units, but also a gentle exploration of the history and material conditions of the historic Mattapan line, which operates as a single vessel feeder trolley to a terminus at Ashmont. A review of the historical record reveals that the MBTA pursued a failed campaign between 1967 and 1969 to extend the Red Line all the way to Mattapan. This effort would have had extreme environmental impacts on where the Harvest River Bridge now spans the river. And it also would have most likely involved the taking of Capon Street and some of those surrounding areas by eminent domain. And the way I visualize this for people is the yard that they were proposing to build on those parcels is now where MBTA Cabot Yard stands now. So that is sort of the degree of industrial infrastructure that would have been placed in Milton. Now, the only reason why I bring that up is because I believe that we must, as a town, understand the history of this, understand that, yes, we do need more housing. We desperately need more affordable housing. That's abundantly clear. But we also need to understand, the history of the line. And Mr. Chair, you've brought up several times a wonderful analysis of the fare policy of the MBTA. And perhaps there's an equity implication here because fares are not necessarily being collected on that train by my observation and discussion with several of the conductors. So I thank you for exploring this issue. I encourage you to research this issue further. I encourage you to work with the town planner to learn more about this issue. And I encourage all residents of the town to learn more about this issue. I believe that there's an MBTA Communities Forum that's open to all next week. I believe that's on Tuesday. So to all those watching, please engage, please learn. We need to hear from everyone on this issue. So I appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Humphreys.
Thank
Perfect time. All right, are we, has our 15 minutes expired, or?
You've just under a minute left.
Under a minute. Anyone want to grab the last minute, either online or here? Is it going once, going twice? Item 4, discussion approval of the Milton Glows Gold Proclamation. Do we have anyone here from the Michael C. McHugh Memorial Foundation this evening? And I don't know if we do online. We do. We have Carrie McHugh online. So if we could promote, Mr. Loisel, promote Ms. McHugh.
She is now a panelist.
Good evening, Ms. McHugh.
Good evening. I appreciate the fast promotion.
Well, you're welcome. Wasn't my doing, certainly Mr. Luzell. So why don't you, without putting you on the spot, if you just want to lead us in this discussion of the Milton Glows Gold Proclamation, we'd much appreciate it.
First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for initiating proclamation or considering the proclamation for the second year in a row. We really appreciate the town, the select board, and of course, chairman's support. I'm sorry that I'm unable to be there in person. I really would have liked to have been, but unfortunately it wasn't an option. Michael, my son, Michael McHugh, passed away on August 5th, 2017. This weekend was actually his 6-year anniversary, death anniversary. He passed away from a rare pediatric cancer. And in that fight, we learned the incredible value of the community and just how lucky we are to live in Milton. Because of this, 2 things have really come out of it. One is we have, for the 3rd year in a row, created the Milton Glows Gold initiative, which works to support raising awareness of childhood cancer amongst the families in the Milton community. We try to do this in a way that is fun and supportive. Cancer impacts about 15,780 kids a year. And every year we also see this impact families within the Milton community. We use this event to both raise awareness about childhood cancer in ways that are easy to understand for the kids in our community, but also can be more in depth for the older, for the adults. We use it also to raise money for the Michael C. McHugh Memorial Foundation, which people affectionately know as the MCM Fund. The MCM Fund raises money to pay for funeral expenses for families that are low income within our communities. So not just Milton, but in New England. But we see a real need for this, and that need seems to be increasing, both coming out of Boston Children's Hospital and Massachusetts General Hospital. So I am asking for your support again this year. We do know that we have the police, the fire, and the schools who have committed to get involved. We last year attempted to run, walk, or ride a mile in support of each of the 15,780 kids that are diagnosed each year. And we have struggled mightily to reach that number. And so we have changed this year to be the Jumping Jack Challenge. And we will be trying to jump 15,780 jumping jacks between the kids in the elementary schools who will be participating. Those who choose will be participating on September 29th, and also through social media, which will be going on through the month of September. People can learn more at miltonglowsgold.org and can sign up and register to have their jumping jacks counted, and also to help raise money by pledging their jumping jacks. The day that Milton Glows Gold this year will be September 29th.
Thank you very much, Ms. McHugh. And I just want to read very briefly the proclamation so everyone knows what we're talking about, and then we'll have comments or questions from the members. So this is a proclamation, Milton Glows Gold, whereas the Michael C. McHugh Memorial Fund was founded to honor the life of Michael McHugh, a Milton teen who lost his battle to cancer in the summer of 2017. The fund provides low-income families with everyday needs, from basic living to school supplies. It also supports families who have lost a child to enable them to afford funeral, memorial, and non-medical end-of-life expenses. Whereas September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and in September 2019, the MCM Fund launched Milton Glows Gold as a way to raise awareness of the realities of childhood cancer. The generosity and enthusiasm displayed by the fund's partners, the business community, and the participants of Milton Glows Gold continue to exceed expectations. Since its inception, the MCM Fund has raised more than $150,000 to support families, as well as organizations that provide respite during and after treatment, such as Rhett's Roost, the Children's Room, and Experience Camps. Whereas the town of Milton is a proud partner in Milton Glows Gold, the events serve as a way to bring students, families, and staff together to honor Michael and raise awareness about an important cause. On September 29th, the Milton Public Schools will celebrate Milton Glows Gold with a new event, a jumping jack challenge. The town of Milton, Milton Public Schools, and the community at large participate in Milton Glows Gold in many ways, including wearing their MGG or gold swag, collecting coins to donate, wearing gold at athletic events, and generating excitement on social media. Milton Glows Gold participants are encouraged to put gold ribbons on their doors and lights in their windows to show their support. Now, therefore, we, the Select Board, proclaim September 29, 2023 as Milton Glows Gold Day in honor of Michael C. McHugh. Questions and comments from the members? Mr. Zoll.
I'm just delighted that we're doing this. I think a lot of folks know that I used to work at Boston Children's, and I've worked with a lot of families on the 6th floor, which is the oncology ward at BCH. A lot of the kids there taking the bridge over to the Dana-Farber, which is another fantastic hospital. The effects of cancer on pediatric cancers on families, on communities are devastating. And I just want to acknowledge how incredible this, the McHugh family has been here in turning grief into literally into gold. So just congratulations on this effort. I think it's wonderful, and I look forward to seeing a lot of kids doing jumping jacks later in September.
Ms. Musto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also wanted to say what a wonderful way to honor the memory of your son. And obviously your family and the community has been through a lot with what happened to him, but to turn it into something wonderful for the community and something where you're involving, the children in this, I think is really, truly amazing. And I really want to commend you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys, the support that Milton has given to this event, to this program, to my family, to the people who are involved, even the Fruit Center, who's our major sponsor, has been, it genuinely touches me. So thank you.
Anything else? Do we have a motion?
Okay, I'll make the motion to approve the proclamation designating September 29th, 2023 as Milton Glows Gold Day in honor of Michael McHugh. I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McHugh. Appreciate it. And we'll certainly be in touch.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Item 5, discussion approval citations honoring Sergeant Mike Breen and Sergeant Mike Dillion on their retirements from the Milton Police Department. At our last meeting 2 weeks ago, in the introduction of our new police officers, we acknowledged the longstanding careers and longstanding service of two recently retired sergeants in the Milton Police Department. In the case of Sergeant Dillion, who retired after 36 years of service, serving as in many roles, including as a uniform patrol officer, day liaison officer, and detective. And we also acknowledge the service of Sergeant Mike Dillion, who retired after 42 years and 9 months of service to the Uniform Patrol Division of the Police Department. And did I say Sergeant Mike Breen?
You said Mike Dillon.
Oh, I said Mike Dillion. All right. Well, that won't be the last mistake I make this evening. So thank you. The first one was Sergeant Mike Dillion. Let me do it again. Sergeant Mike Dillion, retiring after 36 years of service to the Milton Police Department as a uniform patrol officer, day liaison officer, and detective, and Sergeant Mike Breen, who retired after 42 years of dedicated service to the Uniform Patrol Division of the Police Department, and is the current record holder as the longest-serving sworn member and longest-serving sergeant. So we have official citations. My understanding is that the two retired sergeants couldn't be here this evening, but are appreciative of the citations. Comments or questions or motions?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the citations for Sergeant Mike Breen and Sergeant Mike Dillion that are presented tonight.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. We have been requested by the presenter, one of the presenters for item 12, which is the discussion up and approval of the Wharf Park CPA, to move up item 12. But I don't know if Mr. McKay is here. Is Mr. McKay here? Oh, he is here. All right, I didn't see him in the back. All right, so without objection, as a courtesy, Mr. McKay's schedule, if we could move up item 12 just before the next item. Is that all right? All right, Mr. McKay, if you will. And I believe Mr. Nick Milano, our town administrator, who is joining us online, will be able to introduce this item, which is the Wharf Park project. I think we'll go to Mr. Milano first, and then Mr. McKay. I don't know if you all have coordinated your effort here.
We have not.
All right. All right.
We have not, but thank you, Mr. Chair. Scott, I'll turn it over to you in a sec. Just wanted to let the board know that Scott prepared a solicitation for a landscape architect for the Wharf Park project, excuse me, that would go out, and he wanted to speak to the select board about the process, just to make sure everybody was on board with what that process is. This is technically select board land that the CPA project was applied for. So I'll let Scott take it from there, and I'm available for any questions as this goes.
Mr. McKay.
Thank you, Nick, for the introduction and for the accommodation to move me up on the agenda. My name is Scott McKay. I'm a Precinct 2 town meeting member and a former park commissioner. I'm also on the board of the Friends of Milton Recreation and the Milton Farmers Market. So that's how I became involved in this project. As most of you are aware, Wharf Park is a small but actively used park, very near to the only waterfront in Milton, and it's been home to the Milton Farmers Market since 1996. And that's been every Thursday since, during the summer and also the fall time period. So not only does the Milton Farmers Market use it, but it's also home to Milton Crew for storage in their off season as well. And like Nick said, the park is titled for general municipal purposes and under the auspices of the select board, and that's why I'm here tonight. The ultimate decision-making lies with you, the select board. And the future of this park really depends on the decisions that you make. Over the past 3 or 4 years, I've spent a lot of time in the park as on the Milton Farmers Market board. I know a select board member have also attended down there, and the park is in complete disrepair right now. The slope of the park from Adam Street down to 88 Wharf is substantial. And with the use over the past 26 years by the farmers market, a lot of the ground cover has eroded, and there's a lot of roots that are coming up through the soil. And also there's a fairly old walkway, brick walkway, that bisects through the park that is impassable right now. So it's really an unsafe condition. So it's no longer accessible, and it's very dangerous for seniors who want to be attending the farmers market. And, you know, a good part of what we do at the farmers market, we want to be a beacon for the community and be accessible to as many people as possible. That's why it's located where it is. It does have access to the T and other neighborhoods that are around that area. So it's important for the park to be in usable shape for the farmers market. And that's why we decided to go ahead and apply for CPA money. We know that the town generally runs on a pretty lean budget, and there was no funding source for this type of a project. So when CPA money became available, we applied for a $25,000 grant. The Milton Farmers Market, in conjunction with the Friends of Milton Recreation, to bring on an architect to design a more usable space, and also to be able to garner some support and some input from the community to potentially grow the usage of the park. to possibly have a bandstand or something like that down there where either the arts center or music groups can play down there, something that is going to be more accessible to more folks in town. So with the CPA funding, again, we got $25,000 for the design portion of it. We identified 3 capable local architects to start this plan. And that's where we are in the process right now. We've asked them to submit their applications by the end of this week, and then in the subsequent 2 or 3 weeks to review those applications, have them in for an interview, and make a selection on who we're going to use for this project. So with Nick Milano's help, we will conduct those interviews and select the best fit. So kind of the timeline for the project. For the first few months, September to December, the architects will be doing some significant outreach in the community. We have asked them to provide and to host at least 4 public meetings for the stakeholders in the neighborhood and also throughout Milton to give input on what potentially this park could look like in the end. So we will be back sometime in February of 2024 to go over those designs with you and again lay the project at your feet to make some decisions on where to go from here. Included in the proposal that we asked of the architects was also not only the conceptual design for the space, but an implementation plan that could identify some funding sources in town, but also some make-safe measures in the meantime until such a project can be finished. So again, we're not asking for you guys to vote on anything tonight. That will come further down the road, but we wanted to make sure that the select board and the community knew that a process would be starting soon to rehabilitate Wharf Park. I'm willing to answer any questions you have.
Questions or comments from members? Ms. Bradley.
So I'm actually going to say I'm a little bummed it's not coming to the end of my street, Mr. McKay. I was really looking forward to it, as were my neighbors. I'd rallied them all together, and we really wanted it down there. I understand why you're staying. I hope that one of the 4 public meetings is held here at the Senior Center for the seniors to be involved. A lot of the seniors in our town actually qualify for SNAP benefits. And as you know, those are doubled through the HIP program. And so they have a hard time accessing the current site to utilize those extra dollars that they get. So if you could just maybe mention that to whomever gets it, that would be great if you could coordinate with the COA about that.
Sure. And just to make folks know, while it's under construction, we're still going to want to be located somewhere. So potentially it could be at the end of your street.
We would really love it. We were excited, and a lot of neighbors were like, why aren't they here yet? And so I'm happy y'all got this, and that's great. But you would have had a welcome home at the end of the street.
We appreciate that.
So thanks.
Other comments, Mr. Zoll?
I spent a little bit of time at the farmers market, and I'm just really delighted that this project is moving ahead. I'm sorry, Aaron, that you're not going to have the farmers market at the end of your street. But the dangers to seniors and anyone with mobility issues at that space is real. I see it firsthand every week that I'm down there. And this is, it's not just a farmer's market with food. The library is there. Local elected officials often set up tents there, and nonprofits are there. Awareness raising happens there. So it's really a great community space, and the efforts to make it more accessible and viable, really, for people with mobility issues. I'm delighted that it's moving forward. So thank you for your hard work on this, Mr. McKay.
And thank you for your time down at the farmers market as well.
My pleasure.
When's the next time you're playing, by the way?
I'll be performing there on Thursday. If anyone wants to hear me sing and play guitar with my fiance, you're welcome to come. But I don't know if we really want to put that out there for the public.
Well, we just did. Other comments or questions? My question is just procedural, and I don't remember if, and Nick, maybe you can help with this. I don't know that it's town land, select board land. Have we delegated this activity to the Friends of Milton Recreation to act on behalf of the town for this? Is this something that we have checked with town council just to make sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's crossed?
I don't know the history on that. We can certainly do a little research. But ultimately, the select board in this case would be the contracting authority. So it would be a contract between the town and this landscape architect. So perhaps when we come back with a contract for approval, we can encompass a vote if necessary to allow the Friends to kind of move this project even further along.
Ms. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but wouldn't it be under the town meeting members' vote that they took on the approval of this? Wasn't this part of the scope of what you guys put forward?
The chair of the CPC is actually in the audience here, but to answer the question, let's see how.
I mean, we would have
how
to
this
sign
works.
we'd have to sign the contract, but you guys have the authority to go and get
Correct.
this.
The CPA, you can apply for money through the CPA as the awarded, the contracting authority within the town, or it can be by a nonprofit organization.
Okay.
And both these organizations that I spoke of earlier are 501c3 organizations. So we are able to put in an application and the town would actually contract with us to perform these services or manage these services on behalf of the town.
I think that's the issue, the fact that we just want to make sure that it's clear that the Friends of Milton Recreation and the other 501c3 are delegated that by the town and assisting the town, because it's the town really that has a decision-making authority on this. And
well, we all know that you select board members. Things in town wouldn't get done if it wasn't for volunteers.
Well,
so
that's right. That's right.
as a volunteer organization, I thought it was important for the community to step forward in this endeavor, and that's why we took this on.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure with town council that we just, as I said, dot all the i's and cross the t's on the RFP, and then obviously in the contracts we're going to sign. But I just don't want to get to the point where, if I don't want to make sure I don't want to get to the point where we have an RFP and then we realize the process was it all compromised. So that's the only question. Maybe making a mountain over a molehill, but that's
Thank you.
the question. So Nick, you can follow up on that.
Yes, we will do that. And just so this scope of services as landscape architectural services is exempt in terms under the procurement law. So the steps that we followed and will follow to get applications in are all set. It's just a question of, as we go forward and actual work is being conducted on town land. So we'll double check for that, and I'll circle back with you if there's any actions that are necessary.
Great. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. McKay.
Thank you again for your accommodation.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. So I will entertain a motion to recess our meeting.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to recess our meeting to meet as the trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. So now we are in recess our meeting of the Select Board is in recess. And I will call to order our meeting of the trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust. And we have item 2 on the agenda, and that is the trust fund financials. And is this Mr. Milano teeing this up?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to provide an update at the end of the year in terms of the trust fund financials. As you all know, the Governor Stoughton Trust Fund has the $5 million purchase price from the Pulte purchase, as well as $350,000 that was for an easement up there. And at the close of the fiscal year, the total balance in the Governor Stoughton Trust Fund was $5,489,799. So that gives approximately $140,000 or so above that $5,350,000 corpus that Attorney Freitag often refers to, which is the portion of the trust that can't be touched. So the total is $5,490,000. Against the corpus is about $5,350,000. So
You're a little mumbled, Nick. If you could get back to better sound.
Sorry about that. So
That's
$5,490,000 is available to the trust currently against the corpus, which is the $5,350,000 of money that cannot be expended.
Questions or comments on the trust financials? Ms. Musto.
And this is of which date exactly? That's the amount as of which date? June
I'm
30th?
sorry. As of June 30th,
30th?
2023, at the year end, fiscal year end.
Thank you.
All right, and any further on item 2, the trust financials? Item 3, discussion approval, use of town farm for affordable housing, request for proposals for affordable housing on the town farm. The background on this is back in the wintertime, we had the opportunity to have assistance from MAPC in creating an RFP for affordable housing in the town farm. The purpose of creating an RFP was and is to, if the board decide, the trustees decide, was to present something to the Attorney General's office. The reason we present it to the Attorney General's office is because we act as trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust, which is the Governor Stoughton will, which says that this land is to be used for the poor. The question is, what does it mean to be used for the poor? And so we often seek, when we take actions with respect to this property, when it's unclear whether this is for the poor, we seek the feedback from the Attorney General's office. And so this process, which began, I think, in February with this RFP, the purpose of this at the first stage would be, if the trustees agree, would be to send it to the Attorney General's office to see if this is a use that is appropriate under the will, which is considered a trust. So with that background, the select board 2 weeks ago was presented with this RFP, but we determined that it really should be the Governor Stoughton trustees that should be reviewing this, and so that's why we have this. And this RFP, as I understand it, we had the assistance of MAPC in creating it, and the Affordable Housing Trust has worked on it as well, and there are some issues that they have raised. And so I think we have members of the Affordable Housing Trust here today, so it may be helpful for them as we go through the issues in this draft RFP. So if you want to join us, Mr. Callahan, Ms. Kramer, to the extent there are questions. It seems to me there are some issues to be determined as an initial matter before we decide whether to move forward. We also have on the agenda whether we would have a public hearing on this as well to get feedback from the community. That's item 4, so we can talk about that. But it seems to me we can discuss these items that the trustees need to decide if they're going to move forward with an RFP to send to the Attorney General's office as an initial matter. So, Ms. Kramer, Mr. Callahan, do you want to lead us through some of the issues? Do you want us to do it? How would you like to proceed here?
I think we're at your disposal. So,
all right.
If you want to lead, and we'll.
All right. Well, so it seems to me, unless anyone else wants to lead through it, Mr. Luzell.
I just wanted to point out, Mr. Chair, that Select Board Member Wells has joined on Zoom. So if you take a vote, you'll just have to do a roll call.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So please promote him. So
he is a panelist.
Okay. Great. Okay. As a Governor Stoughton trustee. Right. Okay. So it seems to me the first issue in the RFP and the invitation to bid was the use of the word affordable, and whether that would include mixed income, or should we just leave the term as affordable under the RFP? Yes, under the RFP. So questions or comments on that issue from the members?
I'm sorry. Where are you?
Oh, I'm on right at page 2,
Invitation.
right at the top, invitation to bid, and it's highlighted, and there are comments.
Comment?
Yes.
Choose to go through the comments as they are.
I'm going to go through the issues as I understand them in the document. Mr.
So
Callahan.
not speaking to that, I just want to issue a correction. You said you'd make multiple mistakes tonight.
Made another one. See?
It's not, the RFP was not drafted by MAPC, it was MHP.
MHP,
Mass
sorry.
Housing Partnership.
Sorry,
So just,
sorry.
just for
Yes,
the record.
I'm glad you corrected it. I'm glad you corrected it. And so that's just two tonight.
Yeah,
two.
I
So
mean,
we'll
that's not
see.
bad. That's
See if
not
we can
bad.
keep it. See if we can keep it at that. All right. So questions or comments from the members on the use of the word affordable, and anything else as we go on here.
We have a comment about the 3.5 buildable acres, and there's reference to 4. So is it 4 or 3.5?
So 4 acres were
Total.
left after the Woodlot Road development was in place, but the town, as stated earlier, was given $350,000 more for an easement on that 4 acres.
I got you.
So now the real buildable land is closer to 3.5.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Any objection to moving forward with the use of the word affordable?
No objection.
None.
All right. The next, we go one paragraph down, and there's a discussion of a lease and whether this is something we want to talk about as a lease to the property. And it looks like MAHT, which is the Affordable Housing Trust, recommends that, I believe. So if I can try to read that tiny type, looks like that's recommended. So any comments or questions on that issue? Ms. Mustow.
Sorry, go ahead. I just have a quick question. So are we going to be discussing, after you go through each point, we can just have a general discussion?
That's what I thought we would do, but we can have a general discussion now if you wish.
No, perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I just to point out, and I don't think people have access to the document, but I think that the comment that this is a common practice in the development of affordable housing spaces and keeping the ownership of the land with the town, that we should just highlight that, because I think those are two good reasons to go forward with the word lease.
Yep. Any objections
No.
to that? All right. Moving forward, I don't know if the development objectives is an issue, where there's, when we talk about, this is on page 4, when it talks about an architecturally harmonious development. I don't know if that, with no more than 3 buildings, I don't know if that's an issue for any of the members, or if we can move forward with that. There are no comments on that.
Not an issue.
All right.
Not an issue.
No questions. No questions or comments. Page 5. There is a reference on page 5, second paragraph, under affordability, to a regulatory agreement with the and I guess maybe we could, if Mr. Callahan or Ms. Kramer could flesh out what the reference to the regulatory agreement is, if you know.
Sure. So in rental development, which is typically done through a federal program called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And with that program comes a regulatory agreement that restricts the affordability or the income levels of folks that can qualify for that housing. So there's a regulatory agreement issued by DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, that lays out, essentially what the housing units, what AMI, area median income, those can be used for. And it's a percentage typically that's part of when you apply for the low-income housing tax credits. It doesn't have to be 100%. Most affordable projects on town-owned land are, but it doesn't have to be. So it's a very detailed document, a legal document that's recorded, obviously, with the deed.
Okay.
With the land.
Thank you, Ms. Kramer. Other comments or questions on the highlight on page 5 related to the regulatory agreement and the affordable housing restriction. Did I see your hand, Ms. Musto? Or?
No.
Oh, sorry. I'm seeing arms.
At the end, I will talk.
Just kind of keep
Anyone else? Are we okay with, in terms of the language? Are we okay with the language, according to Ms. Kramer and Mr. Callahan, that existing language without any changes on affordability?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the question that was asked, and I think there is, are there ramifications on the appraisal and potential financing issues? It's a very standard clause, and I don't think, most affordable housing would be subject to that. So I don't think there's significant financing issues that are raised by this. So.
Okay. Comments or questions on that, Ms. Musto?
Yes, I was wondering if you could explain for people watching about affordability and in terms of for Milton residents. So I was under the impression that any affordable housing could only be up to 70% Milton preference. Could you please explain that?
So there, it's not a state law, but there is a guidance from the Mass Commission Against Discrimination that allow. There's guidance from issued by the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, MCAD, that allows communities that are building affordable housing to reserve up to 70% of the units for town residents or other. Different towns define it differently, but sometimes it's town employees who might not be residents. Other times it also includes workers of businesses located in the town as well. So sometimes it's a slightly more expansive definition, but essentially 70% local preference is what MCAD has issued guidance is permissible to meet fair housing guidelines, and then 30% would be marketed region-wide or statewide even. So towns do not have to comply with that. 100% of the units could be marketed throughout the region. But the reverse is not true. You can't market affordable housing to just the town's residents. Otherwise, all white towns would stay all white. That's what it's for. You would never have, if you had a town that was 99.9% white, and many of our suburbs are not quite that, don't have quite that lack of diversity, but some come close. It would be discriminatory against people of color and other non-white folks if you marketed it just to town residents. That's where it comes from in terms of the guidance.
And
it often is followed by the next question. Governor Stoughton said, for the town's poor, any resident to move in to this would be the town's poor. They would be a resident of the town of Milton.
And, just for a little deeper clarity, it doesn't, so what happens in a rental community, it's leased up through a lottery. So everyone applies to this lottery, and there's a bucket that says Milton residents, or however we define that preference, Milton preference and non-Milton preference folks. So what happens when you do a lottery is you pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from the lottery, from the preference, and then 1, 2, 3 from the non-preference. The Milton local, they get into the non-Milton bucket too. So, in some cases, because there's such a heavy 70% preference, you can end up with a property full of Milton local folks, which is why some towns decide to lower that 70%. It can be anything up to 70%, including 0.
Mr. Wells and then Mr. Zoll. Mr. Wells. Oh, I'm sorry, Roxanne, were you?
I'm set right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Wells and then Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm fine with everything that's been said, except to the point that the 30%, because I hear Tom's comments that if the project were approved and completed at the end, all the residents would be now residents of the town of Milton. But if you were allowed to have 100%, to allow 100% Milton residents of the poor who met the affordable need, not the affordable need, the poor need is outlined in the Governor Stoughton Trust, which is what we are bound by as trustees. How do you defeat that 30%? I just don't know how you do it, because if the trustees were allowed to seek 100% residents, I don't think we'd have any trouble filling 100%. So that's the issue. I think the $1 million question here to the Attorney General is, how are you going to justify using Governor Stoughton funds to provide residency for 30% of the new residents going into this potential development who do not live in Milton now? And I can't get past that question. I hear Tom's argument, yet at the end, they're all residents, but our need and our ability to fill it at 100% exists today. And so how do you exclude those 30% and use Governor Stoughton monies that we give to truly deserving needs for the poor currently and historically? This board and boards before, we just have a big problem with how you justify that. And that's something that I think town council really needs to get delineation from the Attorney General on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Callahan?
Yeah, I would just, there's a couple lawyers in front of me. There's probably lawyers in the audience. There's lawyers at the AG's office. So ultimately, I will defer to the AG's decision on this. I would just point out that the history of the site, going back, right, for significant decades, it was used as a home for transient poor. Emphasis on the word transient, right? It was travelers. It was people passing through town. It was not always, but that was under the guise of the will, so the site has quite a history of serving, not current Milton residents. So that's all.
And I guess I would just add one other comment to follow up. So if someone came to Milton and rented an apartment in Milton and then applied to the food pantry, which is serviced by the Governor Stoughton Trust, how is that much different? I know there's a fine line. I know it's a huge argument here in town. I also know that fair housing sort of takes precedent over many things. And I would just add that if Governor Stoughton Will said, don't use penicillin, would we not use penicillin? I just feel so strongly about this. And I Mr. Wells, I just feel like you're missing the point. This is for the poor of Milton. Milton was a different town. It had different borders when this will was written. And I don't feel we should be taking a stance on exclusionary housing. It doesn't look good.
Mr. Zoll.
Thank you. I would encourage anyone who's curious about this topic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, so, anyone who's curious about this topic to really look at the history of the poor farm. I've had the opportunity to kind of dive into it, and it is really fascinating. Look at the shifting nature of how do we support the poor, how do we support the indigent populations. Often it fell in colonial times and then pre-Revolutionary War times to towns. You had residents who would move from one poor farm to another, kind of just trying to get by. And so I think the idea that we locked this down in for just Milton residents is, we didn't do that with the Pulte development and require only Milton residents buy those very nice homes. So I would just really encourage anyone who's curious about this to read up. My question for the board is I think it would be helpful for the town to kind of understand when we talk about 40 or 50% AMI to 80% AMI, what are we talking about? Because I think folks often hear, affordable housing and they're picturing people with no jobs. They're picturing, they're worried about, who's going to be moving into these spaces. And this is another thing that I've learned about, but I feel like you guys can explain a little bit better. What are those numbers, and what kind of incomes are we thinking about when we put those out there?
So I don't have the numbers. Maybe you do.
So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think that the rule of thumb here that's going to be easy for all of us to remember is 100% median area. The area median income is for a family of 3 is roughly around 100,000. Don't quote me on that exact figure. It's probably a little under or a little over. I'm not sure. So 50%, we're talking about 50,000 and below, 80%, 80,000 and below, roughly. It does change with household size, right? For a 1-person household, the numbers would be significantly lower than that. For a 4 or 5-person household, slightly higher. So, but I think the thing to retain in your head is 50% of median is about 50,000 and below.
I think that's really helpful. Yeah. And, particularly when we think about town employees, teachers, maintenance workers, other folks are in that bracket. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. A couple of points I guess I would like to say. One is, I know there was some comment made about using penicillin. We wouldn't have used penicillin and that type of a philosophy. We oversee the trust. We are the trustees of a trust. And as so, there's a will and a trust. We have to look at what the wording is. We could all put our own ad lib things in there if we wanted to, but the trust says for the poor of Milton. When the Kidder branch, when we just sold that library and there were certain things that came up at town meeting and funds had to go certain places, it was because there was a trust and they couldn't do things that weren't in accordance with that. As far as the Pulte home sales, we weren't on the board. I don't know if any of us were on the board when that happened. I don't know if you were, Mike, but none of us were there. So we can't rehash what happened with that particular sale. But what we can do is we can look at what the information says now. My question is, if something goes forward here that is a 70-30 split, which is the maximum that you say we could do, I would like to know if the trust is sued. I want to know where the money for defending the trust comes from. Does it come from the town paying the attorney fees or the trust paying for an attorney that has to defend the decision to go with affordable housing? And I think that's a valid concern. The money that we accrue off of a $5 million amount that's sitting in a bank is used for the poor of Milton, the food pantry, people that can't afford maybe medical bills or heating. It is used every day for the good of many people in this community. And I want to know what we will anticipate, because if the trust gets sued by a decision that's a poor decision, then money who's going to pay for that lawsuit? Is the money coming out of the trust to defend itself, or is the town paying for it? Seems to me like it would be coming out of the trust if the trust makes a bad decision, or however decision it makes, good or bad. But if it gets litigated, that to me is something we need to be cognizant of. And as far as affordable housing, I don't think there's one person sitting at this table that doesn't believe we need affordable housing in the town. I'm not convinced this is the location. We have a trust. The trust says for the poor of Milton. It is not for us to say things about penicillin and all sorts of things would never have happened. Listen, I work in medicine. There's always advances, right? But the history and what this document says is pertinent. And that's what I would say about that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. So page 6, there's a question about the easements and having town council review the easements. Any objection to the idea we need to make sure the town council locks down on what the actual easements as opposed to proposing? Page 6 as well, on the project permitting, there's a suggestion, rather than this be a 40B, that this could be a friendly 40B or a PUD. And I think the suggestion is that this would be a friendly, the anticipation that this would be a friendly 40B or a PUD. Any objection to including that language as opposed to a 40B?
No objection.
All right, so we'll make that a friendly 40B or PUD. All right, page, there we go on the type again. Page 7, okay, we're okay with that. That'll be the same. Ground lease, we already talked about, so that's good. Just scrolling through. No other questions until we get to the selection process. And there's some revisions to the with respect to an evaluation committee. This is page 13. Sorry, scrolling ahead, page 13. And there is a suggestion that the Affordable Housing Trust would be happy to join an evaluation committee, but that's not set forth in the document. So I think that's just a stray comment. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Not a decision that we need to make. Everything else, I don't think there's any other decision points.
Other thing I wanted to bring up.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely. So that's my list. So now we'll go on to what I missed. Ms. Bradley.
Thanks so much. I think last time that you were here, Julie, you said that there was whether or not it should be the town or the Stoughton trustees that are putting out this RFP. And I think we decided that it would be the trustees. So you guys are just going to go through and fix all that reference to the town and change it over to the trustees, right? Perfect.
I think they
they had?
to do so. I think it has.
All right,
changed.
sorry, I must be
town
looking
staff
at.
probably will do that.
Somebody will.
It looks like it's.
Okay, thanks. I must be looking at an older version. Thank you.
Can I ask just a general question? How specific does the RFP have to be? I mean,
So we don't usually have questions from the audience because otherwise we really wouldn't be able to get our work done. But what's your question? I'll make one exception.
the question was, how specific does the RFP have to be that you send to the Attorney General? In other words, can you make changes after it's sent?
Oh, certainly. I mean, well, I'll take that. I mean, ultimately, it's the Governor Stoughton trustees that will decide. The Governor Stoughton trustees, it seems to me, would want to make sure that that it is proper in the eyes of the Attorney General's office. So I can speak for myself and say that I wouldn't want to make anything more than ministerial changes to something that the Attorney General's office has, if and when they said it was okay. I don't think we should make anything more than ministerial changes without getting a further review. That's my own personal view. Others may have a different view. But I do want to limit it because if we had 50 people asking questions, we really wouldn't. But and our next item is going to be having a public hearing, and that would be more of a back and forth. So anyway, let's get back to the RFP. Nothing else here. Any other either specific? Oh, Mr. Loizell? Mr. Wells. Sorry, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You just touched on my point because, as you know, I think 6 of the 7 projects that we've dealt with in my 7 years here, the majority of them wound up in some type of litigation. I think based on what the residents brought forward at Citizen Speak tonight, that it'd be prudent of us to conduct the public hearing and get their input before we send the RFP off to the Attorney General's office for review. I think that only makes sense. And my second point is, I think it'd be prudent of Mr. Milano to pull out I think it was 2009, the bid that took place from the trustees for the 30 plus acres that Pulte ultimately bought. And look at how because that was the trustees as well, and look at some of the references. I think having been familiar and been involved in that process, not as a select board member, but as a bidder at that time, I think it'd be prudent to take a peek at those, at the RFP and the bids that were received.
So thank you, Mr. Wells. So, Mr. Milano, a few to-dos. One is we're gonna incorporate the changes that we've discussed tonight. 2 is to have town council review the easements. 3 is to have town council review this RFP to make sure it's appropriate. And then 4 will be our next agenda item when we get to it. Ms. Musto and then Mr. Zoll.
Thank you. Could you also have Nick ask town council about if there was litigation, who ends up paying for it? I'd like to know that. Thank you.
Nick, you got that?
Yes, I got all of that. Thank you.
Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we lose our guests, I know that the RFP process, there's a sort of a general timeline that happens sort of Commonwealth-wide for these types of projects. So it'd be helpful to know what to expect. When would be too late for the RFP to kind of get considered in the next construction cycle. So when we schedule the hearing and submit to the Attorney General, we're kind of operating with that in mind.
Sure. So it's a little bit of a two-pronged answer. There is a funding round every year that the state holds for these types of projects, and you're applying not just for the low-income housing tax credit program, but you're applying for other subsidies that are, given to proper projects like this, so they can be realized. And that happens in February, most years. And so, when I had talked about this the last time I was here, my hope was that we could put this in place for an early winter RFP. Once December and Thanksgiving hits and into February, folks who might be applying for this kind of RFP will be tied up in the funding round work. So I'd like to give it the best shot we could and have the most folks who would be able to apply for this RFP or submit for the RFP, so you have a lot of options to look at. I just don't want to limit it because they have, they're working on projects that they already have in their pipeline.
So that sounds, if I can ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair. It sounds like you're talking about like early November, late October, the RFP is out.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, Ms. Bradley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what's in front of us is the shell of an RFP basically going to the AG's office. There's nothing that says that we couldn't move that down a track while also getting public input to change the RFP if the AG's office does it. Because my fear is it took us a while to get in front of the AG's office prior. And so it's August. The legislative session is over. They honestly are all on vacation right now. This is the month of vacation in state government. So I'm concerned that if we don't keep moving this down the AG track just to get an answer from them, we're going to be put behind an 8 ball for that timeline that you just discussed. So this can obviously be revamped with anything that we want it to be revamped with. This is just a shell of a proposal of what we're talking about to go to the AG's office. And so I guess my question would be, can we do both? In your opinion, doing both of these things would be a positive effect to make sure that this timeline is actually done correctly, right?
I think yes. I would answer that yes. I
Okay.
would say that the comments that we might hear from the community or the abutters might have to do with setbacks, might have to do with, where the property or where the housing would be placed on the site.
Right.
So they don't, so they have their space and their, and so the AG's office obviously doesn't weigh into that. I think what the AG's office will weigh into is, the use of this property.
Right.
And they may say, we think the affordability should be set at X.
Right.
In keeping with the spirit of the will.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification.
No other comments or questions? Ms. Musto?
I would be concerned that we're not hearing from the residents. And I think that, to be on the timetable of developers, I think that we need to look at the residents that live near there, and we need to talk with them first. I think we're doing this backwards. I think we need to talk with them first and get some ideas from them as well, because they abut this property. And of course, we're in the summer. And as I said at our previous meeting, in the middle of the summer is a tough time. There are quite a few people here. I don't know if they're all for that, but that issue. However, I would say that the summer is a tough time. And so to rush a bunch of meetings or to rush this through to get an opinion, we haven't even talked with the neighbors. We represent the residents, and we also know that this is for the poor of Milton.
Mr. Zoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make it abundantly clear that I wasn't suggesting that we don't talk to neighbors. That I was simply, I know there's a Commonwealth-wide process, and I think it's good that we're aware of how these processes work and how the businesses that actually do this work time their business so that we can plan our meetings out accordingly. I think early November I know the summer's been flying by. We've still got some time before we're in November. So I wasn't suggesting in any way, Ms. Musto, and I am really looking forward to hearing from the abutters and other members of Milton, because I think this is really a Milton-wide issue, not just an abutting to the property issue. I look forward to hearing from a lot of folks on this, and I would never want to rush that process so that we were, shortchanging the ability of the citizens of Milton to chime in on something like that.
Which is a great segue to item 4 on the agenda, if we're all set with item 3 on the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Item 4 on the agenda is discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Bradley?
So I don't feel like number 3 is done. It says
Okay,
discussion
fair enough.
approval for the RFP. And so I don't really know where we're at right now. We're at a place where we're going to talk about a public hearing, which is awesome. That's great. But I don't know why we can't do the AG track and the public hearing track, because this RFP is not the final RFP. This is not what's going out to the builders in November. This is just to get it in front of the AG's office. And I really strongly feel like if we don't start making those contacts right now at the AG's office, we're not going to get in there before October. So I'm just wondering, it's on here as an approval. Are we not going to do that, or where are we at with that?
So let me make a suggestion.
Okie dokie.
All right. Which is a melding of items 3 and items 4, which is the RFP and the public hearing. It seems to me, I would say that I would like to hear from those who are interested in this to a greater extent before we send it to the Attorney General. That's just me. And it seems to me we could set aside an hour and a half. Perhaps we start at 6:30, 2 weeks from tonight, and set aside an hour and a half, or an hour and a half, and hear from the residents. And then we might take some action at that point if we feel that we. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking of. Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I would advocate for a separate meeting just for that, because I feel like an hour and a half of our big meeting is a lot of time.
It is.
And I would rather have it, just focused on that. And I think if when are you talking about doing that? Because I would think it would have to be after the summer, because you will not get people. This is, August. So I don't know when you were thinking of that.
August 22nd, our next meeting. When my suggestion was we could set aside of our meeting on the 22nd, we could start at 6:30 and set aside an hour and a half, and hear from the public what they have to say. And then we could make a judgment, well, we've heard enough, we haven't heard enough, we need to have another meeting in September. It seems to me it would start the process.
I think we could allow for online participation in such a forum as well, Mr. Chair.
We could. Mr. Wells, I'm sorry, Ms. Musto, can we hear from, go ahead.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells.
Okay.
So I just want to go historically, Mr. Chair, as you're aware, on all the other projects that this board dealt with, Falcone, 648, 652, Blue Hill Avenue Ice House, we allowed separate hearings, separate public hearings for input from the residents. I think these residents deserve the same due diligence. And to quote our former esteemed colleague, Melinda Collins, who was our representative of the Affordable Housing Trust 4 years ago, she came to our board and predicted that this would happen, that the Pulte neighborhood would in fact become a neighborhood with residents who are now live in the town, and they would want to be heard in this, just as the Indian Cliff people. And in the bigger picture, one of the bigger things that we need to look at that is not even mentioned yet is that this is the 1, 2, 3. This is 4 affordable projects being either proposed or being approved within a half-mile section of Canton Avenue between Highland Street and the Parkway. So I think that to take some time to hear these residents out, and perhaps something will be adjusted in this RFP that they want to have and that we may agree with. I think it only does due diligence. Again, as you know, historically, we wound up in litigation in 6 out of 7 40B proposals that come before us in my 7 years in this board.
All right. Well, and I would just say it's certainly not without precedent for us to have to set aside time in our meetings to have a public hearing and with respect to 40B projects. So it's certainly not without precedent. Ms. Musto.
I would just like to say again, I think that number one, I think people are away in August, and I appreciate that people can go on Zoom, but sometimes you can't from where you are, that people are away on vacation. A lot of people take vacations before their kids go to school. Some people are starting back the end of August.
People will be back.
Yeah.
Well, it depends. What if your kid doesn't? I mean, that's, yeah. So not everybody will be. Some people go to private school as well. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think that we should have a separate dedicated meeting, number one, and I think it should be after the end of the summer. Personally, it's hard for me to get here for a 6:30 meeting for an hour and a half, and what if somebody wants to talk a little longer than that? You know, it's a lot to fit in one meeting. I think it should be its own dedicated meeting. I think, you know, we're here for the residents. Okay, we're here to listen to our residents in this town, and I think not doing it with respect and not, you know, just putting it in for an hour and a half of our meeting, I just think that's not the way to go. I think a better way to go would be a separate meeting.
So it appears that we have consensus that we should have a public discussion of this.
Yes.
We have a consensus there, that we will have a public discussion of that. So the question is when and how we do it. Other comments or questions? We've heard from Ms. Musto on this. We've heard from Mr. Wells. Any other comments or questions on Mr. Zoll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to Ms. Bradley's point about the process with the Attorney General, it sounds like if the Attorney General comes back with comments, it's probably going to be pretty specific comments on percentages around, you know, applications, income, that sort of thing, and not to the broader point. And I think what we really need from the Attorney General is just kind of a, yes, you can do something like this. No, you can't do something like this. And so I think that it would behoove us to put something in front of the Attorney General now. And if the Attorney General comes back with significant changes or comments or you know, and while we're doing that, of course, proceed, I think as Ms. Bradley has pointed out, proceed with the input of the town. If the Attorney General's comments come back in a way that we feel like are going to be prohibitive from what we have learned from the residents of the town, require us to change things around, then I think we would be duty bound to then go back to the Attorney General with an updated version. But if we felt like the changes that we're making from the town's perspective don't interfere with the changes that the Attorney General has sort of put out, then I think we're in a better space. So I think it would behoove us to approve the amended version of this, still on item 3 of the approval, the amended version of this RFP for submission to the Attorney General for approval, while at the same time knowing that we're going to item 4 to make sure that we have input on the town and knowing that we may be getting changes in from the town on the RFP. I think it would, just from an expediency perspective, so I would like to make a motion that we approve the amended RFP that's before us for submission to the Attorney General.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion?
I just real quick
Ms.
wanted to
Bradley.
discuss something about that. I think that I completely agree, obviously, members all, with this. And I think that, you know, the AG's office could come back and say, no, we don't like this project at all. And then all of the hours of meeting, we can just put that into what it is we can look at next. There's no guarantee that the Attorney General's office is going to go for this. And so, in my opinion, I think, as we often say here, that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think it's something that we can do together in a way that complements each other, because this is just an overarching shell of what we're looking for. So that's my 2 cents.
So is there an emerging consensus here that if we approve this draft RFP for review by the Attorney General's office and set up a meeting sometime, a separate public meeting sometime in early September for the residents? Although I'd like to get feedback sooner, but if it makes sense to do it then, maybe we should. Is that a consensus view? I see Mr. Wells' hand up. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do agree with Ms. Bradley, and people need to be cognizant of the fact that the Attorney General may absolutely say no to this proposal. But secondary to that, given the comments of the residents and their interest in the RFP before it goes forward, I still think waiting until we have a hearing with them is prudent, but I'll wait until we vote, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded. Any further, Ms. Musto?
I just want to reiterate, I think it's backwards. I think we should be asking the residents first. And we have time. We don't have to be on anybody's timetable. So that's how I feel about it. And I hope that people understand that's where I'm coming from on that one. I think we need to listen to our residents first, and then we can always go forward if we feel that that's the best decision. Again, I have concerns. This is for the poor of Milton. So again, I want some answers from Mr. Milano on some of the information I've asked for. Thank you.
All right. So, but if we do have a public hearing, you think September, a separate meeting in September is a better way to do it than to do it as part of the meeting 2 weeks hence?
I do.
Okay. Right,
thank you.
I do as well.
So, all right, Mr. Wells does as well, and I do as well. I'm convinced of that, and so I will say for myself, I'm prepared to vote on item 3, and then to set a convenient date in September to get the feedback on item 4. So, any other comments on item 3 on the motion? This will be a roll call vote because we have Mr. Wells. So we will go alphabetically. Now we're back to alphabetically. Ms. Bradley.
I vote yes.
Ms. Musto.
No.
Mr. Wells.
No.
Mr. Zoll.
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Okay. And now item 4. Do we want to approve having a public hearing on this sometime as a dedicated meeting in September?
Whatever y'all want.
Someone want to make a motion to that effect?
Not to complicate things, but we would, the Affordable Housing Trust would love to co-host that with.
That's a great idea.
If that's appropriate. And we'd love to be part of that.
Certainly, the more the merrier. So, so does someone want to make a motion to schedule a public hearing on this RFP for some?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
For some date?
I'll make a motion to schedule a public hearing for a date to be determined in September for a public hearing on the RFP, potential RFP for Governor Stoughton property, the remaining 4 acres.
I'll second a motion to.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion?
I have some discussion.
Ms. Bradley.
I don't know that we're meeting as the trustees at our next meeting at the 22nd. We are not. So we would have to come up with the date for this today.
We could meet. We can always notice a meeting for the governor's
We can just
trustees
make
on
it
the
happen,
22nd.
Len.
Yeah, we can have a meeting on the 22nd as the governor's Stoughton trustees. We're certainly not precluded from doing it to set a date for
So maybe that's the motion.
Yeah.
Is that the motion that
we reconvene on the?
I don't think we need a motion for that. Okay. You can just instruct the chair and we'll do it. So we'll have a meeting on the 22nd to set a date. That's convenient. So now the motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wells' motion seconded by Ms. Musto. Any further discussion? All those in favor of this? This will be a roll call vote. Ms. Bradley.
I want to say yes, but I also want to let folks know again that I am starting school up again, so we're back to Tuesdays, unless it's going to be during the day. So I vote yes, but I just wanted to put that caveat in the world.
And we can talk about that on the 22nd, scheduling. Ms. Musto.
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
Yes.
Mr. Zoll.
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the Governor Stoughton trustees.
I'll make a motion to adjourn Governor Stoughton trustees.
I'll second.
Motion been made and seconded. All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. All right. So now I'm getting my mojo back. All right. So we will.
Your command of the alphabet is impressive.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. All right. So now we will return to our meeting of the Select Board, which is, we are item 6, which is discussion approval of a contract. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, just if you could move outside, that would be helpful. Thank you. Discussion approval of the contract with Beta Group for traffic engineering consulting services. And I think we have Is Mr. Berkeley here on this? Oh, he's right here. And who else do we have on this? Chase, is this you on your own? What's that?
I think I'm it. Yeah.
You're in. Okay. All right. So if you could tee this up for the members.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So Chase Berkeley, Director of Public Works, and also Chair of the Town's Traffic Commission. So the contract that we're requesting approval for tonight is the final step in multi-year process to establish a traffic engineer role in town. This is something Mr. Zulus, I know, was personally involved with in a direct recommendation out of the traffic mitigation report that came out in 2020.
Yeah.
So we've gone through.
If I may, Mr. Berkeley. Sure. So, sorry, sir, we can't close the door because it's an open meeting. We have to keep the door open just because it's an open meeting. Appreciate the effort. We can't do it. All right, so go ahead, Mr.
Sure,
Berkeley.
no worries. So we've gone through and looked at some of the surrounding communities around us. Braintree, Wellesley, Newton, all use this firm, Beta Engineering. Beta Engineering has a long history in the town of Milton and has a lot of institutional knowledge about our traffic patterns and signal equipment, and has done multiple planning studies over the years. So they were selected to pursue a contract with. So basically, we're at that point where we're going to enter into a contract and be able to assign them task orders to look at specific items. Just for example, the Traffic Commission met last week, and there were 3 recommendations that came out of that meeting to advance design and look into specific items further. So now that we have this resource, we can get to work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Berkeley. Comments or questions on the contract for traffic engineering consulting services?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Wells.
I make a motion to approve the contract with Beta Group Inc. for traffic engineering consulting services.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? I will say this is big news. This is something that we've been trying to get for a number of years. We now have the resources for it. We have the service provided for it, and we can now try to get a handle on some of our traffic issues in town. So this is big news. This is important. This is something the Traffic Mitigation Committee wanted or suggested or recommended several years ago. So this is, I think, important and well done. And thank you, Mr. Berkeley, for shepherding this through.
Thank you. And I failed to mention that we also have construction funding to pair with this engineering services. So there's $100,000 in the FY24 budget that we can also get to work on. So this is a great opportunity
to try to improve traffic in town.
Yeah, specific to traffic calming and traffic related issues. Yes.
Great. Fantastic. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Absolutely.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 7, discussion approval bike master plan. This is Mr. Zawinski. Is Mr. Zawinski with us?
Yes, promoting now.
Is he here?
Yeah, I think
He's being promoted.
Oh, okay, great.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
A little bit light. If you could try to raise the volume a bit.
All right. Let me see if I can lean forward. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. I'm Zoom 1 for whatever reason. I was just hosting a sign review committee meeting. I'll change that.
Okay.
So this is just you should have received in your packets a recommendation from the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Recommending that the Select Board adopt and approve the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. That was commissioned by the Master Plan Implementation Committee and completed by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council back in June of 2022. I believe that there's been, I think I briefed the Select Board, we've briefed the Master Plan Committee, we've briefed the Planning Board on this plan. And there's been a lot of discussion at the Master Plan Implementation Committee about, what would go into this recommendation and kind of, how they would frame their advice to you on the treatment of this plan. So the plan has been completed for quite some time. Just to sort of recap, we had commissioned the Metropolitan Area Planning Council to do this plan. It's an element of the master plan in terms of the traffic and circulation portion. There's a priority put on safety for pedestrians and bicyclists and offering residents alternative methods of transportation for the purposes of public health and climate change mitigation and recreation opportunities. And so, MAPC put together this plan. It's a very high level plan in terms of kind of looking at our existing roadway network, looking at our existing pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and making recommendations for various projects that would give us a complete and connected bicycle and pedestrian network that, connected population centers to recreational opportunities, commercial opportunities, connections to public transportation. The principle is, you look at the streets that we have, you look at the facilities that we have, and what are the sort of the feasible ways to get safe, efficient, connected bicycle and pedestrian facilities in our existing roadway network. The plan went through an almost year-long process of research, analysis. We had public forums. We had again, briefings at multiple, public bodies, and it's been out there, since June of 2022, and we think that, the select board, as the body that has jurisdiction over changes or alterations or improvements to the roadway network in town, it would be appropriate for the select board to sort of, adopt this as the town's plan moving forward, so that, as we work through a street repaving schedule, as we look at grant opportunities, as we look at, infrastructure projects that, similar to the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan, which the town adopted back in 2018, this would be sort of a guiding plan for how we do roadway improvements. And so, when we do those improvements, we're thinking about incorporating these bicycle and pedestrian improvements, as we move forward. So, I think, obviously the MPIC letter speaks for itself, and that's, your committee jointly appointed with the planning board. And so, they advise you to do that and to adopt and approve the bicycle and pedestrian master plan.
Thank you, Tim. Comments or questions from the members? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. So as somebody who sits as your select board rep on the MPIC committee, there was a lot of discussion about this plan. Some people even thought maybe it should be called a concept or a draft plan. We got a lot of input from neighbors and different people that sent in comments. But I would first like to thank Tim and the planning department for taking this on, as well as MAPC. So I do commend you for that. The concerns that I think, if we're going to adopt any kind of plan like this, I just want to point out a few of the concerns that had come up. So some of the things were that somebody had said this is more of an aspirational kind of plan. It has a lot of ideas in it, and it would need to really be vetted with, with concerns with safety, neighborhood input, resident input. There are some parts of the plan that talk about really altering roadways that could affect traffic flow, safety-wise as well. So that, there are a lot of things in it. Some parts of the plan are pretty straightforward. Some are concepts that, would need more work. For some of the thoughts that people had mentioned were, where the bike, to put something like this through where bike paths are safe, where it's established that the changes won't negatively affect the flow of traffic, where it's established that the changes won't negatively impact the neighborhoods where the proposed changes would be taking place, and a rigorous public process regarding proposed changes where that has been vetted, and with the uses of the roadways involved. there were things in it such as taking away lines in roads or making some roads, adding lanes to roads, making certain roads one way. And all of these things would have to be properly looked at. We also have roadways where we have evacuation routes. We're an evacuation route through the town. We also have roadways that are heavily used by ambulances, fire trucks to get to locations. So I think that there's a lot of good in the plan, but there's a lot of it that why you see all these letters and concerns are that, I don't think that putting something like this on a shelf and saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z without any further input from the residents should happen. There are valid concerns, and all of the letters, we had requested that all of the letters that MPIC had received are in here, and I believe they are. So there's a various amount of letters. If you've had a chance to look through them, that would be helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Musto. Other comments or questions? Mr. Zoll.
I've looked through the letters, and I think there are some who have some specific questions about some specific aspects of the plan, but there are others that are largely in favor of it as a whole. I think just as we all agree that we need more affordable housing in town, I think we all agree that we need efforts in town to reduce the amount of cars on our road, to make the cars on our road drive in a safer fashion, to provide more opportunities for pedestrians, for bicyclists, rolling stock, I should say. I think that's a really great way to put it, ride, roll, or walk. So I think I'm really excited about this plan, and not just because it means that my street that my kids live on and who would love to be able to walk around, and doesn't have a sidewalk on Canton Ave, would now get a sidewalk if we were able to move some of these projects forward. But across the board, I think this is a really fantastic, positive direction for Milton to be moving in. I wholeheartedly support this plan. I'm excited about it. And I'm hoping that we'll start to see some of these changes put into place, because this is not the first time that we've really, as a town, kind of looked at some problem spots in our area and tried to identify some things that could be done about it. These are some really good specific suggestions. I'm certain, as Member Musto points out, that we're going to have public input on any projects that actually start to get funded and look like they might be able to put in place. But this is exactly, I think, the direction that so many members of the Milton community want us to move in. So I'm excited about it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that I've been talking about bicycle riding and the safety of it in our town since I got elected. I often say my son rides from Lower Mills to East Milton to spend their money on almost a weekly basis. I still get extremely nervous as he goes through East Milton. Even with the changes, it still makes me very nervous. But many of the roads that they're on, there are no sidewalks, there are no ways for them. He runs around with 5 or 6 kids, so they're all on their bikes and they're going from Pat's all the way up to Stella's. It's like all they do is eat because they're 14-year-old boys. So I just want to say to all the folks that work on this, to Tim, to the MPIC, to everybody that gave their input, I am all in favor of this, and I am really looking forward to seeing our town become more accessible to not only our youth, but to those that live in our town with disabilities and don't have as easy a time to get around. So thank you for this effort. I applaud it.
Other comments or questions? I have a question for, I think it's for Mr. Zawinski or perhaps Ms. Musto, and that is in the cover memo, it talks about getting input from the police and fire departments and the traffic commission, and that they all should be consulted for the input. Is the idea here that, similar to the master plan, we now have a bike and pedestrian master plan, that it needs to be implemented by some entity or some board or some committee? And if that's the case, who is it? Is it the Master Plan Implementation Committee? Who owns this if we adopt this tonight? And Tim, it's either Tim or Roxanne. And Mr. Wells has his hand up, but let me just ask Tim for an answer to that question first, and then we'll go to Mr. Wells.
So I would think, and you know, there could be multiple answers to this question, you know, but I do think that, you know, using as a kind of a principle the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan, which you know, this bike plan cribs heavily off of, you know, the concept of complete streets being, you know, you want to sort of redesign streets so that all users, drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, you know, have space where they can operate and travel safely. You know, the complete streets policy that the town has is really such that if we're doing roadway work, we are looking at complete streets principles to implement on those roadways, you know, where it's feasible. And so I think the principle behind the bike plan is, you know, when those projects happen, when we repave Brook Road, you know, for instance, we're looking at the Complete Streets Plan, we're looking at the bicycle and pedestrian master plan and saying, you know, what do these plans say for this street? What do we need to implement in terms of, you know, bicycle and pedestrian facilities? I think, you know, given the concerns that I think the Master Plan Implementation Committee has raised and some of the letters that they got, and, you know, we've heard this in multiple meetings, and I've said it in multiple meetings that, you know, this is a high level plan that is, you know, it's conceptual and it's schematic in its nature. And so when you're doing those projects, you know, those go through all of the normal processes that you know we would need to go through. I think when you're making alterations to the roadway that's sort of beyond what exists today, you're going to look to the Traffic Commission for their advice. I think, you know, the Select Board, you know, again, as the ultimate authority in terms of alterations to our you know, to our roadways, could, you know, implement any sort of review process that it wanted to, you know, for a project. And I think there are a lot of instances where, you know, if there's a side street that we're painting bike lanes on, you know, go nuts. But I think, you know, if you talk about a bigger project, you know, we're putting a protected cycle track on Brook Road, you know, that's something that warrants greater analysis, greater review, greater input, that the Select Board could at any moment kind of, you know, decide this is how we want to approach this. We want to go to the Traffic Commission. We want to have a public hearing. We want to use the townwide traffic model to evaluate the impacts. We want to use some of our new budgetary resources for, you know, traffic engineering services to evaluate, you know, what this would mean for traffic and for neighborhood impacts. And so, you know, I don't know if it necessarily rises to the level of, you know, we need a Bike and Ped Master Plan Implementation Committee, but I do think that, you know, this board, you know, in its capacity as sort of the authority over our roadways, you know, probably utilize the Traffic Commission, you know, in its role as an advisory body to, you know, again, just take a look at these projects as they come up, and kind of, you know, do that. But again, you know, you could create any process that you wanted to, depending on sort of the impact and the size of any given project.
Thank you, Tim. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Tim took a lot of what I was going to say, having chaired the Traffic Commission for 10 years. As he knows, and he sits on the Traffic Commission and sat on it previously when he served before. Those are our subject matter experts. Going back to your previous comments on the beta hiring, we've needed a traffic engineer for some time. Tim's correct in, well, there are places where you'll be able to do this, and to Ms. Musto's points, there are places where you aren't. Many of the roads in this town were developed for horses and wagons and don't have sidewalks, and by historical definition, they never will be able to have sidewalks. But we do have a congestion and a volume problem in this town, and I think that both the beta hiring and addressing this master plan bike program plan is probably a smart thing for us to do going forward. Just like the master plan did when it was first created and conceived. It was drawn upon by many different boards, sometimes us, sometimes the planning board, often the Traffic Commission, sometimes the town engineers, sometimes the traffic consultants for town. So it's not perfect. Everyone who's commented tonight is correct. You know, we're a beautiful community, and as I've said probably 1,000 times in my life, traffic is not an amenity of the town of Milton. Absolutely not, and never will be. So I think this can only help us going forward. So that's my comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Other comments or questions? Or motions? Mr. Mr. Zoll.
I'd like to move to approve the bicycle and pedestrian plan from MPIC.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Ms. Musto.
Yes, I just want to make sure that with that, we're going to have all of this packet with it, with the master plan, correct? This packet that with all the letters and all that will go with that bike plan.
I believe this was
pedestrian.
provided by MPIC, right?
Yes, so this will go
should
part
go
of
with
it.
it. Yeah,
Okay,
should go
perfect.
with it. And so
That's
we'll make
perfect.
sure, Mr. Lozelle, that the master plan includes the cover memo and the attachments and all of that. So
Excellent, thank you.
all right. Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wells.
Just a final comment on what Ms. Musto just said. I think everything that's in there is important because prior to beta, as you know, Michael, Mr. Chair, we've had Howard Stein Hudson do, Tim knows, several lengthy projects, consultations in this town, and every bit of data and information that you can provide to them is very important. So I just want to make sure that everything that has been collected is included with what we're voting tonight. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley. This is roll call vote. Ms. Bradley.
Yes.
Ms. Musto.
Yes.
Mr. Wells.
Yes.
Mr. Zoll.
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 8, discussion approval recommendation on the Airplane Noise Advisory Committee letter to the Department of Transportation. We have Ms. Conlon.
I'm happy to defer to Mr. Berkeley as consultant, so I don't have to wait.
Oh, all right, all right. So without objection, we'll move to item 10, which is the water and sewer rates for fiscal year 2024, and then we'll come back to item 8 because of the courtesy of Ms. Conlon. So let's get our water and sewer rates in front of us. Let's see where we have those. And we have Mr. Berkeley from the DPW and someone from Woodward and Curran.
Yeah, hello, I'm Todd Prokop. I'm a senior technical manager at Woodward and Curran.
Great.
Mr. Chair, online we should have Mr. James Aiken as well.
Can we promote
Woodward and
Mr.
Curran.
Aiken?
Yeah.
Jim's a colleague of mine. He's a financial analyst and did most of the work for this report.
All right.
So any technical questions, he'll be very important.
Great.
And there's also a PowerPoint presentation I think Lynn is bringing up now.
I've got the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay,
I don't
I'll call
see Mr. Aiken on there though.
I don't see Mr. Aiken. Unless he's the Zoom user, but Mr. Aiken, raise your hand if you're here. I don't see him. All right, he's not raising his hand, so he's not. Can we proceed without Mr.
We can,
Aiken?
yeah, we can get going. Yep.
All right. And do you want us to publish the PowerPoint presentation?
That'd be great.
Mr. Lozelle, could you take that? And Mr. Lozelle will drive as you will instruct him, I guess.
Very good. So I'll just give a little background before we get into the presentation. So again, Chase Berkeley, Director of Public Works. So we're here tonight to present the FY24 water and sewer rate recommendation. So just to refresh everyone's memory, we do this annually in August following the conclusion of the previous year. So what we take a look at is the water and sewer consumption by the town and then our new budget that's approved at town meeting. And we design a rate, what we call a break-even rate, or a rate that is the minimal requirement to raise the appropriated budget. So just again, as a reminder, the town of Milton is in Mass Water Resource Authority, or MWRA community, on both ends. So we take in drinking water from their system, and then we collect wastewater and transport it to back into their system and then to the Deer Iron treatment plant. So in terms of operating budget, our biggest burden for both enterprise funds is the MWRA assessment. So in the case of water, it's 50% of our operating budget. In the case of sewer, it's about 71%. So as a baseline, generally for rate setting, we need to at least start with their increases to us, which they run on a calendar cycle, which is 18 months behind our fiscal cycle. So we have an exact figure from them when we go to the budget season, which is helpful because we can plan for the exact dollar amount that we owe the MWRA. So with that, I'll turn it over to Todd and James, if he jumps on, to walk through their analysis and recommendation.
Beautiful. Yeah, thanks very much. So I think
Actually, make sure you
sorry.
talk into the microphone so people can hear you.
Thanks very much. So I think we don't have a ton of slides, but I think it's going to just kind of go over a little bit what was in the written report that you all received. And like Chase mentioned, it's really the calculation of a break-even rate. So it's relatively, it's a pretty straightforward process as far as these things go. So I think we could probably advance. So we're going to go through water first. We'll look at the budgeted expenses and revenues. And the usage estimate, because the usage is where the revenue comes from, and then the rate recommendation, and then we'll go through the same for sewer. So I think we should. Perfect. All right. So the slide, and again, most of this stuff is reproduced in the report that you should have had a chance to look at, or you can look at. But the slide shows the proposed water expenses, the estimated water expenses for the next fiscal year. As Chase mentioned, the driver of this is really that MWRA assessment. There's some small changes. You can see a little bit of debt services coming off the books. And so that's a small decrease. There's some small increases in some of the direct and indirect costs, but by far the driver is that 4% increase from the MWRA. And so, you can see in the chart over on the right side, that allows us to calculate, the planned revenue that's needed. And I think we should be able to go forward one more here. We then take that revenue and we look at past consumption trends, so how much water gets used. In Milton, it's important to also look at the tiers. You folks operate on a tiered rate structure where sort of the first usage, the first water that's used in each quarter is the cheapest water. Some people, especially, small households, sometimes can stay in that tier, and the folks who use more and more water end up, moving up to those more expensive tiers. And you can see how that breaks down there in the pie chart on the right side, and the historical consumption trends over on the left. And that allows us to kind of predict what usage is going to happen, what bills are going to go out, and then we can match that to the revenue that is needed to be raised. And I think that should be on the next slide, if my memory is all right. So this is the proposed 2024 rate for water here. You can see it is a 3% increase across the board, so it's a relatively modest increase. Again, mostly driven by that, that MWRA increase. Base rate moves from 655 to 675. The other tiers increase proportionally. It'll move the average quarterly water bill in town. You can see it's only about $7 there. We'll have there's a slide at the end where we look at a few different kind of typical water bills from some different household sizes. But obviously here on the water side, the increase is relatively modest.
Just before we go on, Todd,
Yes, sir.
HCF is
100 cubic feet. Sorry, it's like the standard unit that the water meters use. But 100 cubic feet is 748 gallons. So that's probably a more reasonable, something you can better picture.
So we're talking about $7 a quarter increase average, which would be $28 a year increase average.
Yeah, on the water side.
Thank you. I don't mean to interrupt it just because the slide, it's tough to get back to the slide.
Absolutely. So. No, it's a good question. If there's anything else on there that sometimes we get I don't know, wrapped up in the jargon a little bit.
Anything else on the slide for any of the members? Okay, go ahead, sir.
No, I think it's a good segue. I think we can kind of move on. We can go through those same calculations on the sewer side. So here, when we look at it, again, the same sort of process. You can see the MWRA assessment, unfortunately, is a little bit more. So it's going up 4.7%. So it's a little greater increase there. There is a small amount of debt service coming off the books. So that's a pretty modest decrease. And again, some small increases in direct and indirect costs. We can kind of punch all of that through and determine the amount of revenue that is needed to be raised to cover all those expenses. And that's shown over on the right. We can go to the next slide, and that'll show the sewer consumption trends. One thing I want to point out here, because this is a major driver of the increase that we're about to see, is the sewer consumption, especially in the higher tiers, has been trending down. It isn't a trend that we've seen on the water side as much. But what that means is that those highest tiers where you raise the most revenue, unfortunately, I mean, it's fortunate and unfortunate. You're sending less to MWRA, which is nice, but it also means that you're raising a little bit less revenue because the sort of most expensive gallons are what's being eliminated, unfortunately. And so that is a trend that we've noticed over the last few years, causing just and so we need to kind of make up for that when we look at the revenues. So with that in mind, we can go to the next slide here. And again, because of that MWRA assessment and the historic reduction in the revenue in the higher tiers, this is a little bit larger of an increase, obviously, when we look at the sewer rates. So that base rate going from 731 to 812, and that the average bill there you can see going up by about $40 a quarter.
Any comments or questions on this slide?
I think we've got one more that shows. Yeah. So if we go forward one more slide, I think we should be able to just see some numbers that, and so this the average bill is one thing, but this kind of chart kind of allows you to see the increases for some different kind of typical families or households you may have in Milton. You can see that the case one is sort of the base user. That's the people who stay all in that lower tier. Often people who live alone or elderly, things like that. And you can see, the increases on those folks are relatively modest. The kind of blue column in the middle there is what MWRA publishes as like their average family of four. So again, we can kind of look at that as what the quarterly household increase is going to be. Those increases that adds water and sewer together.
That's water and sewer together.
It is, yeah.
So $48.59 a quarter?
Yes, sir. Yep. Yeah, that's the combined rate change on this. And that's why you see the percent change is, in the 7 to 8 range there. It's that's a combination of the 3% water and the 11% sewer. Yep. Obviously, it hits some people a little different just based on what tiers they're in and such.
So that made me even more confused. May I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
It's okay. So on the left-hand side, you've got existing FY23 and then recommended FY24. And that's an increase of, it's not $40.50. So it'd be an increase of minimal, like, what's that, $1.60 or something? So you're adding that to the 48? Like, I'm trying to figure out what the total is that somebody would be paying extra. It would only be the $6.07?
Column one. Case one.
In case one, yeah. Again, case one's it's someone who stays in that first tier, so a very small water user.
Okay. So that's an annual number. That's not a quarterly number?
Quarterly. So the numbers, if you see
it is quarterly.
Yeah, it is quarterly. So total quarterly with the existing water rates, their bill right now would be about $83. With the proposed water and sewer rates, their bill would go to $89. That's the $6 difference.
And the T at the top, that shows which tier they're consuming in. So there's like the T.
Yeah, it's
T1, T2, and then case 5 you get to T3.
Yeah, it's their marginal tier. It's where their last gallon gets billed.
Where their last gallon gets billed. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have more presentation? Do we have more comments? This is the last slide. All right. Comments or questions? I can't see. Oh, okay. I can't see. Mr. Zoll.
So I'm curious. I think a lot of us would know if we wanted to reduce our water usage, how to do it. Shorter showers, more efficient usage of appliances. How does one reduce their sewer? And because you said that there is a reduction in sewer, and I'm curious about that because my assumption would be, I don't know. It's hard to reduce the sewer.
It's very long. So sewer billings is based on the water meter reading also. It's the same figure that comes up the water meter. There's no practical way to measure sewage in every house.
Okay.
So we use the water meter readings and apply that rate to the same amount of consumption. So the difference is particularly in Milton, we're primarily residential. We do a lot of irrigating. So there's a lot of accounts that are just for water billing only, that are for dedicated irrigation systems, sprinklers in your yards, outside use of the home. So that generates more revenue on the water side, which is why the rates don't need to be as high.
And then that rate. Sorry if I may with a follow-up. So that then wouldn't be added to the sewer. So you're working on two separate water
Yes,
meters.
you can think of it as two separate things.
Okay, I got it. So if you're improving the water efficiency in your house, you're also improving your sewage export, essentially.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, for every
For lining
7
it up.
gallon toilet that gets switched out for a 1 gallon, that comes off both sides. Yep.
That's great.
Ms. Bradley.
Thank you. Every year I ask the same question. So I have a sprinkler system that I don't use, and I still get charged $40 quarterly, roughly 36. I think it went up to 36. How can would I have to remove the meter to get this? I mean, what does somebody do if they bought a house that they knew had 2 sprinklers in it or 2 systems, but doesn't want to pay the $120 annually? Like, what can we do?
Yeah, so you can just do the plumbing work to remove it and deactivate the account. Yeah.
So, but the meter would have to be removed
Yes.
before it's deactivated?
Yeah, as long as the meter's in place and it's an active account, you get that minimum bill because it's associated with the administration of reading the meters and sending out the bills. But if you eliminated the account, that would get rid of that for you. Yeah.
And who do we contact for that, Chase?
That's just the DPW Water Department. Yep.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Ms. Musto.
Thank you. Chase, could you tell us how the rates this year, percentage-wise from MWRA, how that compares to last year's increases? And what do we typically see, maybe over 5 years, if you have that information or an idea of like how much do they typically go up a year? I'm sure they never go down, so.
Right, so the MWRA Advisory Board, which is a group that's in place to keep the MWRA's rates in check, basically, has a goal of their overall rate setting process, and it's 2.5% overall. It wasn't always that low, but they've kind of got to that point where they're able to do that now. But in between the individual communities, that number can fluctuate greatly. So on the water side, we're paying exactly what water was metered into Milton. So that figure is based on just how much we take in from them. The sewer side is a much more complicated rate calculation. It's based on the population, the peak flow that we generate into their system during a rain event, and some other factors, and they use some multi-year averages. So the wastewater rate is not as clear cut as what did you use last year. There's a lot more that goes into that. So as far as like how did we do this year as compared to last? So last FY23 MWRA rate increases were both in the 3% range. So they've come up from that. The town's water and sewer rates for the past 3 years have been very modest, 2 and 1% increases. I think what we're seeing here is a little bit of catch up with the economy in the state it's in. And those utility costs and all their operating costs are finally passing through into those assessments. So this. And at the same time, we're selling less sewer volume, so we have to make up that difference.
So,
yeah, please.
If you had a crystal ball looking ahead to next year, any ideas what we might be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, so the big driver is weather, right?
Yeah.
So we've had a pretty wet July, and the last time we had a wet July, it did impact us. Again, it's 1 month out of 12, so we'll have to see what the rest of the year does. And that's the difficult part about our rate setting process is that the seasonal effect can be very dramatic. And if we have a very dry year like we did last July, which was a drought condition, the irrigation sales really do well. And a lot of those are at that top tier 4 rate. And we tend to generate surplus when that happens.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions? Or motions?
I'll make a motion that we approve the sewer and water rates that we're doing.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Thank you, Chase. Thank you, Todd. I didn't get your last name. Prokop. Thank you, Todd.
everybody.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Appreciate all your
And special thanks to Mrs. Conlon.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Speaking of Ms. Conlon, let's go back to item 8, which is discussion approval of recommendations of the Air Quality Noise Advisory Committee with respect to a letter to the Department of Transportation regarding the advanced air mobility. Ms. Conlon.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the board and the new Assistant Town Administrator. Welcome.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And Mr. Napoli. So what we've submitted to you, and I should say, so Katie Conlon, Chair of the Airplane Noise Advisory Committee, we were posted for a joint meeting, but the other members of the committee were not able to join us tonight, so it's just me. And
More than enough, Ms. Conlon, more than enough.
well, we've worked on a draft that we talked about the last time Mr. Hart and I were at your meeting. I think it was about a month ago. This is a comment letter addressed to the U.S. Department of Transportation. There's a comment deadline of August 16th, which is the extended date. And as you know from the last meeting, the Department of Transportation is, well, stepping back, there was a federal law that was enacted last year, and as a result, the Department of Transportation was charged with putting together a working group to focus on and plan for advanced air mobility, which would be new. It's all emerging technology. None of it is in operation now. Some of it is still in the design stage. So what we're talking about is really something that is emerging, and as a result, the comment letter is pretty general because we don't know what the universe of issues will be. But we're talking about aircraft, whether it's a vehicle that would transport cargo like a drone or eventually passengers that would take off and land vertically and would require the development eventually of so-called vertiports and could create a lot of additional issues for communities around the country in terms of noise, in terms of pollution, but also in terms of cybersecurity, which we've touched on in this letter, privacy, so environmental issues. So there's a lot of issues that this working group at the federal level will be thinking about. And what they did was put out a notice in the Federal Register asking for comments generally on this topic as they develop a national strategy for so-called advanced air mobility. So I think we've sent you the link to the Federal Register notice. There's a lot of different topics that are highlighted in that in which comment is sought. We've only chosen a few of them that we thought might be appropriate for the town to submit comments on. And the ones that we've highlighted are safety, public acceptance of advanced air mobility, which the request for information specifically asked for comments on what the role of the state and local governments might be, privacy issues, vertiport development, and some environmental impacts. And again, the comments are pretty general because it is emerging technology and it's hard to be able to come up with specifics when we don't really know what all of this is going to look like. We did take an opportunity in this letter to call out again the failures of the FAA around NextGen and the concentrated flight paths, and to urge the DOT to have a lot of community engagement early in this process and to avoid the mistakes that were made by the FAA with NextGen. So every opportunity we get to call out that issue, we take advantage of. So this is a proposed draft for the select board to consider submitting. And again, the deadline would be the 16th.
Thank you, Ms. Conlon. Comments or questions from the members? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I was going to say I thought the letter was very well done, and I liked the fact that you had consulted with some people, including someone who's local in town who does a lot of drone work and does great work at that. So I think that's really great that you utilized some local people that do this every day.
Thank you.
Some of the info.
And Ms. Mustard, to that point, I should have mentioned, I want to thank Chief John King from the police department and also two Milton residents whom I contacted on behalf of the committee and then reported back what they advised me. And those two residents were Frank Schroth and Juan Navarro. Frank was a former editor of a drone publication. He put me in touch with Juan Navarro, who has the photography in aerial video and photography business. Sometimes some of his work has been shown on Facebook, and it's quite good. And he's a licensed drone operator and was able to give me a lot of helpful background information that I turned over to the committee. And and Mr. Hart on our committee has a lot of experience in the privacy and cybersecurity area, so he gave us some helpful comments. This letter has also been reviewed by Karis North of the Town Council's office, so it's had a fair amount of input.
Other comments or questions?
I'm ready to make a motion, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to approve the letter as presented by Ms. Conlon, Chair of the Airplane Noise Advisory Committee.
I'll second that.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Thank you, Ms. Conlon.
Thank you very
and
much.
Thank you for
Thank you.
your courtesy to Mr. Berkeley and Mr. Prokop.
Thank you.
Thank
you all.
you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Item 9 is letter to the MBTA Board of Directors regarding classification of and fares on the MBTA High Speed Line. So let me tee this one up just in terms of process. As directed by the board, Ms. Hall, the chair of the planning board, myself, Mr. Milano, Mr. Zawinski set out to put together a draft letter on this issue to send to the MBTA. We worked on it. We circulated a draft to the board and as part of the packets. And that the draft that we came up with was, as I think all of the members saw and is public record, was agreeable to Ms. Hall and certainly was agreeable to myself, to me as well. And Mr. Milano had input, and we had the opportunity for Mr. Zawinski to provide input as well. After that draft was circulated, Mr. Zoll circulated revisions that were, again, published and circulated to the public at the same time we saw it. And I will say, just as an initial matter, I've reviewed the suggested revisions that Mr. Zoll made, and in my view, there's no material change to the ask. There's no real change to the arguments. I think it makes it more focused, and I think the changes make it a more focused and a better presentation. So I'd be prepared to agree to the changes that we saw with the revisions from Mr. Zoll, with one exception. This is really more form over substance. There's a reference to the town when we had the litigation over the staircase to the town had no alternative but to go to the courts of justice. It's a great rhetorical flair, but I just may say resort to legal action rather than go to the courts of justice. But that's I would accept that amendment, Mr. Chair. That's the only suggestion. I think the suggestions again. I think they keep the materially keep the ask in total, the arguments, but make it more focused and a better letter. So that's my comment on process. Comments or questions? Ms. Musto.
Sure. I have a couple of comments about this. So when we had left that last meeting, the agreement was that we would have you as the chair speak with the chair of the planning board and Tim Chewinski to draft a letter. And the purpose of the letter was to see about reclassification of what we're being told category that we are. We're asking for reclassification, correct?
That's not my recollection of the...
It was to, that we would look at a reclassification letter. And when I read this new letter that Mr. Zoll has provided, I think we need to be upfront here. At the last meeting, you did not want to support a reclassification look at that. You had said that. Correct.
You're right.
So when I read this letter, when I read this letter is it doesn't really talk about that as much as it talks about updating the Mattapan line. And I think that it loses its focus because the focus was to put in some history as to why, like for instance, in the first page, it's cut out in Mr. Zoll's letter, the history of what had happened in the last paragraph on the first page. That's all cut out. And when I read a document, I read it front to back, and then I say, what is that document trying to tell me about? And when I read that document that Mr. Zoll provided, it's talking about the Mattapan line, and it actually talks about, the gist of it to me seems like, get it done right away and it'll be like a high-speed line. We are looking at, on this letter, which is what I thought we were doing, and what we told the residents we were doing, is drafting a letter with you and the chair of the select board chair, planning board chair, and our town planner. And you drafted this letter along with Mr. Milano, and the focus of this letter is very different than this other letter. it doesn't come out the same way. I think it was a very strong letter, the one that you guys drafted. The only question I actually had in that whole letter was the date of August 31st. I thought maybe we should have given them a month to respond. But it's a much stronger letter. It's right to the point of what we're asking for. The other letter is not, and I have concerns about that.
Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as you're aware, I've been out of state, and I'm just back in town now from 3 days of the Pan Mass Challenge. So, I did follow the link between yourself, the planning board, Mr. Zawinski, and Mr. Milano, and I agreed with it. I thought it would, to Ms. Musto's point, and to your points that are all in the letter, I believe it's the prudent thing to do. I think that it appears that you're all collectively in agreement with it, that you all supported it, and I do support it. I did not see Mr. Zoll's letter. I did not see his piece, nor was I present at the last meeting, so I'm not. So just based on what I read collectively, the effort that took place between you and those parties, as well as the 20-something letters, emails, or calls I got just today supporting your work, I'd be inclined to vote your letter as prepared. That would be my point. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Zoll.
Thank you. I appreciate Member Musto's comments there. Mr. Wells, if you look through the packet that was provided to the Select Board earlier, you would be able to read the letter. If you have access to a computer and you want to call it up, you'd be able to see it there. Just a couple of quick comments. The discussion that we had was around the classification and asking for clarity around the classification. That's what I heard. I said clearly, as Member Musto pointed out, that I don't support a reclassification, but that I was open to the idea of understanding the reason that we were classified the way that we were, given some of the unique aspects of the Mattapan trolley line. I do want to say, and I'm not going to belabor this point, but I feel like it's worth saying that the reason, because it was raised earlier tonight also in Citizen Speak, the reason that the MBTA scrapped the extension of the Ashmont branch to Mattapan was because of a lawsuit filed by Milton residents in the late 1960s, which was evidenced by, and I think quoted in the original letter. Anyone who wants to talk about infrastructure decisions, housing decisions that were made in this region in the 1960s and the 1970s that doesn't acknowledge the systemic racism that went into those decisions that backed the actions of communities, and I don't limit these comments to Milton. I think that this is a general statement that can be applied to all suburbs, is fooling themselves to thinking that because we were able to successfully, quote unquote, block the extension of the Ashmont to Mattapan, therefore we should reap the rewards of that by reclassifying our own neighborhood, I think is ignoring history and doing a disservice to Milton. And I think, as we also heard in comments earlier, this is our opportunity to lead. So I am in favor of having a letter that asks the MBTA to provide a formal explanation for its classification. I think that that's a legitimate question. I think also the purpose of asking that explanation, perhaps their response may be, let's discuss it. Let's talk about it. I think if we go in demanding a reclassification, if we go in holding our participation, which we are required to participate in under the law, hostage to a reclassification, I think we actually probably limit our ability to negotiate further in the future if it's something that we would like to do. Those are the reasons why I made those changes, both to the history as well as the reclassification. Like I said, I don't want to belabor the point, so I'm going to limit my remarks now, but I will respond if there are other questions about the draft. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let me say this. The effort that Ms. Hall and Mr. Milano and Mr. Zawinski and I made was to respond to the meeting of this board. And I think we all agreed that we had. And we were comfortable that we had. That we had listened to what the board was interested in, and we had responded as requested. Now, in my judgment, the changes, which are shown in red, the only real changes here are to delete the reference to the 1968 report and replace it with more current actions by the MBTA, including just this summer. I view that as a positive. It would, for the MBTA to, for us to rely, although that's what we had, but I think we have more now, for us to rely on a 55-year-old report for what the MBTA said is not, in my judgment, the strongest case. That's why I was persuaded by the more recent arguments or the more recent references being better. I don't think they change it in substance. They don't change the ask. They don't change the arguments. The arguments are the same as the four of us agreed to. Exactly what they were, the three arguments. So in my judgment, there's not a substance. And the only other change, and again, I think it's a positive change, and that is we had a reference to lowering fares. You know, there is an argument that the passengers on the Mattapan line should not pay the same as on the Green line, right? Because they have to take a two-seat ride in, and the infrastructure is not nearly as good. However, those on the Mattapan line don't pay, and so it would be logistically cumbersome and difficult, seems to me, to make that request. Although I don't know that it's necessarily unjustified. It's probably cleaner not to include it. So, in my judgment, those are the only two things. And I think the point is we were asked to request that the MBTA look at this, and that's what this letter does. And it points out the distinctions, and the primary three distinctions that Ms. Hall and Mr. Zawinski and Mr. Milano and I wrote, the primary three distinctions between the rapid transit lines and the Mattapan trolley line. So, in my view, we get to the same place, and if we can have a consensus on something that gets to the same place with a few tweaks, then I think that's a positive thing. Mr. Zoll and then Mr. Wells.
I neglected, thank you, Mr. Chair. I neglected, I do think Member Musto's point about maybe changing the inquiry response date is a good one. And I would like to, maybe we would propose to get a response back. Let me just look at the calendar real quick. September 8th would be a nice even because it'd be a month from now. It's a Friday. So it's a work day, and it would give at least a couple of days in September as well for a response.
Mr. Wells.
Just one question, Mr. Chair. Did you advise the parties you worked on this with that you were going to do this? Do they have any idea that you were going to make this change?
That I was going to do what, Richard?
That you're going to include Mr. Zoll's changes into
I didn't include Mr. Zoll's changes. And Mr. Zoll made some red line revisions, and those were circulated to the public and to us.
And Mr.
I'm just telling the board what my view of those changes are. So
I just want to clarify. I didn't send them to the chair either. I sent them to Nick and to Tim, and I think you got them too. Yes, that's it.
And then they were published to the town and circulated to us at the same time. So I didn't see anything before anyone else. I'm just telling you what I think of them. I think
I'm just asking the question. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm like.
Yeah. No.
I mean,
that's a fair question.
Yeah. No, it's a fair question, Richard. Totally fair. In terms of process, totally fair. Ms. Musto.
Thank you. I would like to see if you could bring up the letter on the screen so that residents can see what this letter draft is and where the changes are, so people can see what we're discussing.
It's also on the
I know it's in the packet, yeah, but I'm thinking for people that are watching maybe on TV that might not have access to the computer right now.
Sure.
I think that we should put that up there. And maybe you can walk through, Mike, some of these changes line by line for us a little bit.
Well, they're Mr. Zoll.
I'm happy to walk through them a little bit if that's helpful. So I think we already addressed the first one. I think as Mr. Zula said, I feel like it's a lot more powerful to use current examples of MBTA neglect of the Mattapan line than it is to drag up history, relatively ancient history. I won't say that ancient because I know a lot of friends with people who were around for that. But I think the example, particularly as the chair reported in his meeting with the MBTA Advisory Board, where the Undersecretary of Transportation was unable to respond to a question about the timeline because she wasn't briefed on the project. I think that is a serious statement about this. The level of information at the highest levels, and I looked this up also. And and I don't want to throw her under the bus, Ms. Tibbetts Nutt, but she had also served on the MBTA board for several years, so it certainly seemed like she would be somebody who should have been informed about it. And the fact that she wasn't, it's not necessarily reflective of her, but I think the overall awareness within the MBTA of the Mattapan line. That's why I made those changes there.
Could I just add that?
Please.
That was in the letter. It was just in a footnote, and now it's in the third paragraph.
Yes, thank you. I did pull. That's the deleted footnote that's later down, and then going down to I'm on. Yes, as mentioned above, leaders do not see. Oh yeah. So that we already addressed. So if we go to the next changes. Can I actually drive on your computer? Might be easier. So then. Again, this is as mentioned above. Did I lose my microphone here? And then I think that this was just the in current state, I think was just a reference to the fact that it may change in the future based on the master plan, but it may not. But it's currently, we wanted to recognize that. So I said the deleted footnote was inserted above. I again removed the reference to the 1968 document as we've already discussed. I think going down here further, I removed the fare. In addition to what Mr. Zula said about the fare, I think the numbers that we've seen from the MBTA and most people, I think, in their experience, something like 97% of riders on the Mattapan trolley go on to ride the Ashmont Red Line, and if they paid a lower rate for the Mattapan trolley and then transferred on to the Ashmont. There's a lot of questions about how would they then get that transfer? Would they have to stop again? It would add another step in the process of transferring. A transfer, which I would say anybody who's ever transferred at Downtown Crossing is familiar with a transfer that involves stairs. It's not terribly onerous, but certainly asking folks to stop and pay more money would be onerous. And here, we continue to believe the MBTA must rectify, I think, just making that stronger. And I think this is the point. It's restoring the proper classification. It's nothing that's restored, right? There's a classification that's in place already. There wasn't a previous classification in place per the MBTA Communities Act. So I struck that line. And I said, again, the purpose of this letter, so re-emphasizing, request a full explanation of the classification. I think this is going to give us important information. This is, I think, what the original intent of this letter was to get that. And I believe strongly that sort of holding our willingness to work on the MBTA Communities Act hostage to the response of this is not helpful. I think it undercuts us in our own negotiations. So that was a quick run through of the red line, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Musto.
Thank you. A couple of things. I think that the history is relevant because it speaks to what they've done before and what they've classified us as before. I think we should be getting treated fairly and equitable. Nobody's saying that we're not going to continue with the process of looking at what our obligation is. That's not what we're saying here, but I think it's a very different message. It almost seems like the way that it's phrased in your letter is more talking about, when is the timeline for the Mattapan line extension? And for any of us that were on that call, which I was, and I believe you might have, I don't know if you were on that as well. Yeah. They were only at 15% design, and who knows when that'll be. There was a gentleman actually from Mattapan who was on there and was commenting that he's been going to these meetings for 5 years.
Yeah,
and he's sort of fed up, right? So, this could happen. I think that if we wanted to do a letter talking about the Mattapan line extension and how they should be, fixing it quickly and so forth, that to me is a separate letter than this letter. And this letter, I thought it was well done. And I think, again, it brings in some of the history. I do think the history is relevant. And I'm concerned that I feel like this letter is a very different kind of a letter than this letter, just the way that it's structured. The comments that are made in it, you come out with a little bit of a different, after you read it, sort of like if you read two books, right? Two different books that are supposed to have the same subject matter. And then you read it and you're like, wait a second, this book really said this and this book really said that. I think that's what's happening here with this letter, unfortunately. And I'm concerned because, also, Mr. Chair, you sat with, two other people to draft this letter. And this is a very different letter. I disagree with you. I think, respectfully, I think it's a very different letter when you read it. And I'm concerned about that because it doesn't come off the same way as the letter that you all prepared. And I think if the three of you had concerns about the way this letter was structured, like even coming to this meeting today, you could have said, we drafted this letter and afterwards I thought maybe we should do X, Y, and Z. I don't think that somebody, when they read this letter, is going to come up with the same conclusion when they read this letter that you originally did. So I think Mr. Zoll's letter, I applaud the fact that he did a letter. I feel it's very different than the letter that was done.
Mr. Wells, before Mr. Wells, let's be clear. There's not two letters. It's one letter, and there's been some revisions made, some proposed revisions to it.
Right.
That's what it is. And the letter provides, in pertinent part, while the short, self-contained Mattapan trolley line loop runs on a designated right-of-way, in its current state, its operation is more equivalent to a bus or streetcar system than to a rapid transit line in the following ways. And then it lays out in bold type the three primary ways that rapid transit lines are different and distinct from the Mattapan trolley line. Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I just got to look briefly. I do agree, and I believe you might be the only member who's going to remember this at all. You and I both know that 7-8 years ago, had the MBTA had their way, this would be a bus route today, correct? Had it not been for the efforts of people on both the Mattapan and the Milton side, just to preserve it from its historical perspective. So, everyone has points, but I'm going to stick with the original letter based on, you did that collectively. I do think the history needs to be in there. I really do. I do. So, that's it. I'm ready to vote whenever someone's ready to make a motion. I'm ready to vote.
Just to be clear, the only quote unquote history that's not in there is the reference to the 1968
right, and
report.
I think that should be in there, because to be honest with you, I didn't know that was there. I know a lot of things about the T, but I didn't know that. So, and when I first read about that kind of jumped out. I was unaware of that.
Ms. Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to accept the draft letter with Member Zoll's red lines and the change to September 8th, 2023 for their response as presented at tonight's meeting.
Can I make an amendment?
Totally.
I think the chair's suggestion around the lawsuit was also a good
I'm
amendment.
sorry, yes. Instead of saying the mighty courts of justice.
Resort to legal action.
That one, that change, which was resort to legal action. Those are the two changes as presented in the red line version in front of us this evening.
It's my letter, so I'll second it. if I can, or if I can't, then I'll leave it to
Again,
somebody else a second.
It was a collaborative letter that you made some revisions to. There's only one letter. Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion?
Might change.
It's a roll call vote. Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Musto,
No.
Mr. Wells,
Sadly, no.
Mr. Zoll,
Yes.
and Mr. Zulish, yes. Okay. Item 11. We have another letter to talk about. And this is a letter to the Neponset. I'm sorry. It's a letter to the community community involvement coordinator of the U.S. EPA New England Region 1 regarding the Neponset River Superfund site. And so I think Mr. Milano is going to, Mr. Wells, did you have something, sir?
No, not yet. Sorry, I didn't bring my hand down. Mr. Milano is fine. I'm listening.
Mr. Milano, do you want to tee this up for us?
Sure. As we had discussed at the last select board meeting, the town is looking to start getting engaged with the EPA regarding the Superfund project on the Neponset River to bring to them our concerns about the project not including portions downstream of the Baker Dam. So part of that process is to start engaging at all the opportunities that we can. There is a comment deadline this week on the EPA's community involvement plan for the Superfund project. So not explicitly about the site, but this is an opportunity for the town to start raising some of the concerns that we've talked about. So Josh Eckert Lee put together a draft of a letter that was in your packet that hits on basically a few topics. The first of which is asking explicitly for a community advisory group for Milton, either Milton specific or a subgroup. This is something that the EPA sets up with Superfund site projects to give affected communities direct engagement into the project. That would enable the town to have access to technical assistance to support that work. It asks that Milton is able to stay engaged and receive information. And the letter does explicitly raise the concerns that we talked about from the town, but also regarding contamination. Milton portion of
Nick, can you just repeat the last couple of sentences because you went garbled again?
Sorry about that. Tough internet down here. So the last two pieces were just to that Milton would stay engaged and receive information. And the letter does include several paragraphs about contamination downstream of Baker Dam, as we discussed as a result of the tie and bond report.
Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nick. So I concur with all of that. A couple of things I think on the letter. I think we want to CC Mayor Wu and also Mayor Koch's office. As Nick knows, this is an issue that involves all three of us. 50%, the northerly side of the Neponset from the Baker Dam out to Port Norfolk does in fact sit in the city of Boston and is just as polluted as the Milton side is. And the same is applicable to the city of Quincy from Black Rock out to Boston Scientific. This is really a critical, when you talk about beta being big, this is really a critical aspect because I don't think anyone, including us, could have ever envisioned when the EPA first came before us to tell us about the pollution on the freshwater side of the Neponset and that it had been placed on the EPA Superfund list, that the saltwater side from Baker Dam out, as a result of the pollutants that were put in on the freshwater side, have washed and polluted the saltwater side, include all of Milton Landing, all out underneath Granite Ave, Adams Street, all of that, just as much as the freshwater side is. And it is important to everyone to understand that when we look at the Neponset River, it's beautiful on the freshwater side. We have a bike path and some pretty bridges to go over. But from an environmental aspect, and that's to include the annual run of fish, striped bass, the herring, the livelihood of the American eagles that live, and as well as all the other aspects that live in that river now today, is critical towards preservation of this true jewel of Milton, as those who use it understand it. And I'm not even getting into the recreational uses. So I think it's important that we include both Boston and Quincy, copy them both. Even Josh may want to make some more mention of them in it, but I think we definitely need to keep them. And I really want to thank Ty and Bond for everything they have done to bring this for light. Had we not gone to the Seaport Council, received that grant a year ago, and brought them in on this, no one who looks at that river, walks that river, or uses that river would have a scintilla of an idea just how polluted it is. So I want to applaud Josh and thank him for all his efforts on this. I know that was a little winded. Thank you.
Other comments or questions?
I'll make a motion to approve the letter with, I think, Member Wells' suggestion is a good one, with a CC to the mayors of Boston and Quincy.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? The only thing that I will say is, and again, I don't want to go down the road of unnecessarily wordsmithing something, but I think the headline here is at the end of the overlap paragraph on page 2, the last 2 sentences talking about the contaminants, and then about the fact that we want this to be considered an operable unit of the site's cleanup process. I think that's the headline. And I didn't know whether that should go up in the beginning, right after the first paragraph, and say, look, we have, there are almost, as shown below, there are almost certainly contaminants here, and we think that the cleanup of the Neponset should be considered an operable site. Again, I'm not wedded to it. It just seemed like the headline was a little buried to me. But again,
what if we bolded that text, Mr. Chair?
Oh, that's great.
Then we don't have to wordsmith it, but
yeah.
we draw attention to it.
Yeah, is everyone
It's his motion. It's Mr. Zoll's motion.
Yeah.
I'll move to bold that text, that last sentence of that
I would
continued
actually suggest the last 2 sentences.
Last 2 sentences.
All right, so that's been an amendment. That's an amendment. Was it your motion on the letter?
I think so, yeah.
So you're offering an amendment. You're amending your motion.
I'm offering a friendly amendment to myself.
Yes, you're amending your motion. Motion was seconded by.
I seconded it. Yep.
And that's okay.
Sure.
All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll is yes. All right. Item 13, discussion of select board policies and with respect to public participation at select board meetings. We put this on the agenda to talk about the timing for public participation and the 15-minute and 3-minute time limits. We have some information in our packet about best practices that suggest that, and according to the MAIA best practices, MAIA is the Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Association, their best practices include 15-minute and 3-minute time frames. So we do have some information on that. We actually, I don't know, we almost came up to the limit tonight, but comments or questions on our 15-minute and 3-minute? Mr. Zoll.
So I had a conversation, I believe that you did, Mr. Chair, as well, earlier with Mr. Driscoll, who had a creative suggestion of sort of creating a bank of time, which I think might get a little cumbersome from a like sort of a bookkeeping perspective. Like, would we tack on a minute next session? Keeping in mind that we are thinking about increments of 3 minutes per speaker. I think if we could consider raising it, I think, to 18 or 21 minutes. I think 21 minutes isn't that long. I think, as we heard tonight, even though we had a full house, we didn't have that many speakers. I think if we have enough folks who are willing to line up, 21 minutes would allow for 7 speakers. That's a pretty good amount of participation. So I would be open to, I knowing that the best practice is maybe 15 minutes, I think maybe allowing for 2 more speakers per session wouldn't be onerous. So that would be my suggestion, but I'm not making a motion yet because I think we should have a discussion about it.
Other comments and questions? Mrs. Musto.
Thank you. So we were all elected to represent the people, and I think we need to hear from people in the community. Some places they would, for citizens speak, they would have people that want to come to speak on something that is not a specific agenda item. So they'd come for whatever reason they wanted to come. And then when certain agenda items came up, if there was anybody that wanted to speak on that agenda item, they would allow a period of time on that specific agenda item. I think that's a creative way of something we could do. I just don't think 15 minutes is enough. I heard from people that it was a little confusing because we have people online. We have people, it's not like we have just people here that you can see who wants to speak. You have people online. There was a confusion about, do they need to sign in over here to get noticed, to speak? And it seemed like they were going a lot with the people that were online. It was just confusing for people. I would hate to have somebody show up here expecting to come and speak and they can't. Because we've sort of limited it. So I think we have to have some kind of limits. I understand that, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, for instance, tonight, you could have had a citizen speak for anyone that had to talk about something that was not on the agenda that wanted to come. And then we could have done it per different issue that were the hot topic issues that people could have some comments. Because as a citizen, it's often hard to come to citizen speak if you have not heard the discussion about a certain item to be able to comment on. So if somebody heard us talking about the letter or something like that, maybe then they would have commented. So it's just another way of doing it.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Zoll. I'm sorry, Mr. Wells.
Mr. Wells.
So I can live with the 21 minutes. I'm okay with that. And to Ms. Musto's point, I do believe there have been some, it's not common, but there have been circumstances, at least in my time, and I believe, Michael, you'll probably be the same, where there might be an issue that's really significant where we allow a citizen speak period to that one item. I think that's something that if we know beforehand, it can be put on the issue. To Roxanne's point, if we had on each one, we'll be here till 3 a.m. Or we could be here till 3 a.m. But I can live with the 21, and I don't think we have to vote it tonight, but I do think that the chair should be able to have the prerogative, should he or she see an issue about to come before us in a given week, to allow for citizen speak period. Doesn't have to be 21 minutes, but for that one agenda item. But that's just my thoughts on it. Thanks.
Yeah, and we'll go to Mr. Zoll and Ms. Bradley, then Ms. Musto. I will add, I don't think under the current state of the law we can have that discretion. I think we need to set, under the current state of the law and the current state of how the courts are coming down, we need to set the policy and stick to it.
So you're referring to that recent case?
Yeah, if we're gonna have.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Mr. Zoll.
I think, admittedly, I think the newest member. I know I'm the newest member on the select board, but citizens can speak about any item that's not on the agenda as long as it's under the purview of the select board, I think. So I don't think that is that the case, or is that not the case?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
A citizen can come to Citizen Speak and talk about any issue that they want as long as it's under our purview.
Yes,
so they don't have to follow the agenda of the meeting.
That's correct.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Other comments? Oh, Ms. Bradley, sir.
No problem. I remember having listened to a lot of the school committee meetings during the COVID pandemic, and they had hundreds of people on Zoom calls that were wanting to speak and speak. Pretty much, I don't want to say they're all saying the same things, but a lot of it was the same thing over and over again. And what they ended up doing was, because the topic was so charged, they would vote at that time to extend the meeting. So it wasn't like they had a policy where they changed their 15-minute rule. There was, this is a hot topic. We want to hear from more citizens. There's 7 more people in the queue. We're going to extend it 10 minutes, and they would have to take a vote. So that's another way of thinking about if we want to do that. Would mean that we'd have to vote every time. And I don't know that we want to do that. But that was just another thing that I was thinking about that had to do with a hot topic. I'm all for the 21 minutes. I think 21 minutes is a good compromise between where we are and wanting more people to speak. I think, breaking it down, that's 7 people. If there's more, I read all the emails, and I'm sure all y'all do too, that come to us from the citizens. I read them all. I don't answer them all. That's your job. But I do read them all, and so it does impact the way that I look at a topic. So know that if you're listening right now and you have sent an email to us, it is something that's taken into consideration. So I just wanted to point that out as well. So that's where I am.
Other comments, questions? Ms. Musto.
Thank you. So I wasn't, I guess I want to clarify, I wasn't, implying that every topic we're going to have people speak at. Sometimes what you do is at the beginning of a meeting, you get a sense from people what topic you're here for. And anybody can come up to a general citizen speak. And then if there's a hot topic, as Ms. Bradley was talking about, then you gauge it at that time. It's not every week that we're going to have that happen, of course. But I think extending the period, we certainly should. 15 minutes when we had people sitting here, that we had one person that came back today, right? But we might have had others, I don't know. So I would hate for someone to show up either here or on Zoom and not have that opportunity. So I think we do need a little discretion with that as well.
So I will add the discretion again is limited by the law. We are limited by the open meeting law as well in terms of labeling something as a hot topic and then having something, or acknowledging something as a hot topic and then changing. Maybe I misunderstood the idea.
Yeah, so my idea would be like if you question, is there anybody online or anybody here that wants to talk on, has concerns about, anything on the agenda? How many people are here for this one or that one or this other issue or people identify if there are certain things that you want to specifically come and talk to the select board about. There's got to be a process for this. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that not everybody is going to want to comment on every single thing on this. Yeah. But there may be you get a gauge from the audience as to what they want to talk about.
Yeah, so the balance here is...
Or just do it at the beginning and extend the period longer than 21 minutes.
The balance here is to have the opportunity for resident input, but be able to get our work done.
Right.
And that's the balance that we're trying to achieve. Mr. Zoll, and then Mr. Wells had his hands up, but it went down. Mr. Zoll, and then Mr. Wells, if the hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment. We actually had a group of citizens at Citizen Speak tonight who I thought sort of demonstrated a great effectiveness, which was, there was, I think, 5 of them in total. They had sort of appointed one different folks, but one person to speak, but had several people standing behind them. So I feel like that could be an instruction that we give verbally to, if you know that there's a couple of people here who have the same opinion that you do, because I think to Member Bradley's point, we don't necessarily need to sit here and hear the same argument made by 20 different folks. It could be a very effective way of saying, if you know that someone's going to be speaking and you're in agreement with what they're saying, suggest that they stand behind them to demonstrate support for what they're saying in a way that, if all 5 members had spoken, I thank them that they didn't because they were all first, then that would have been our 15 minutes and we would have been done. So I think that was a really effective way of going forward. So I do think that there are ways within the law that we could have citizens demonstrate numbers of folks in favor or not in favor of particular things.
Okay. Other comments or motions?
So I'd like to make a motion that we amend our public participation. Is this a bylaw or what is it?
It's our policy.
Our public participation policy to set number 1 to say the length of public comment shall not exceed 21, and then the number 21 in parentheses minutes.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes, although I wish it should be longer, but.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 14, request for written quotations for fiber to the home master plan services. So what the municipal broadband committee has presented to you is a request for quotations to get a consultant to assist drafting a fiber to the home service plan. The broadband committee is reviewing this, but has determined that it doesn't have the capability to put together such a proposed plan. But the Municipal Broadband Committee doesn't know how much one of these will cost. And so the idea here is to send out a request for quotations to see how much it would cost. And then depending on how much it would cost, perhaps we'll ask town meeting for the money sometime in the future. So that is the purpose of this, is to get quotations for a consultant to assist to see how much it would cost. And that's a recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve a request for written quotations for fiber to the home master plan services for the town of Milton.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Okay, item 15, discussion approval Parkway Cab Company taxi license. And do we have, is this Mr.?
This is a renewal. This is a renewal, Mr. Chair.
I believe it's a renewal. Yes, Parkway.
I'll make a motion. Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the renewal for Parkway Cab Company Inc. taxi license.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 16, discussion, approval, reconsideration of the June 13 meeting minutes, and I believe this is Ms. Musto's request.
Thank
for
you.
our agenda item.
Okay, so what I would say about this is, first I want to thank Lynn for always getting the minutes done and doing her very best. What prompted me to ask to have this reopened, I am usually very diligent about reading the minutes, and somehow I really wasn't that diligent on that set, so I do apologize. And I think Lynn can attest to the fact that I always am pretty diligent with the minutes, because I always send her like things about it. But anyways, that being said, what prompted me to look at this was when I looked at the following set of minutes, which we were going to approve last week, which are up for approval tonight. The ones from the 27th, I believe it is. Yes. So there were certain things that were in that, that were stated in there that if you read it, for instance, you know, it looks like for specific things, why is Mr. Wells asking for Ms. Bradley's resignation? Why is Erin apologizing? Why is Mike talking about the SJC decision? That's all in the minutes of the 27th. But if you read that, you say, why is that happening? And so when you go back to the 13th, there are certain sections that there isn't enough of a description. And I don't feel like either Lynn or myself should be the ones to do it. I think it should be Ms. Bradley. Since it involved Ms. Bradley, I think it would be helpful if she could put that into words for us. For instance, when I look on page 2, and we're talking about raised concerns about the ARPA grant, I know that there was an issue with asking for the money back for that. When we're talking about the Animal League, I know that Ms. Bradley had mentioned something about getting an audit done. And I know that under number 14, when we're talking about the one-day liquor license, at the top of page 8, it just says that that Ms. Bradley shared her concerns. But there was more to that, because why would she be apologizing at the next meeting? So I would like to ask Ms. Bradley if she would put it into words and to update these the minutes of the 13th on certain sections, if she could reread those, because I don't want to put words or anything into, I don't want my words to reflect what happened. I think Ms. Bradley is an adult, and I think she could do that herself, because I do think it is lacking. And I think that what happens is if you read one set of minutes and it says all of these things in it, and you didn't see the meeting and you're reading the minutes before, you say, well, how did that all happen? Like, what led to those things? So I just think for clarity, that's what my suggestion would be.
All right, I'll just say, these minutes were approved, as we know, and we don't draft minutes based on what happened in the future. We draft minutes based on what happened at the meeting as drafted.
Right.
Other comments or questions by the members?
I don't feel the need to go back in and change any of the meeting minutes that have already been approved.
I would agree with that. I think we've already approved the minutes from that meeting.
Any other comments or questions or motions? Ms. Musto.
I would just like to say that sometimes when you have minutes, you can go back and amend the minutes based on what actually happened at the meeting. And yes, we approved them, but it's lacking some detail that I think should be in them, or they're considered incomplete. So certainly whatever you guys decide, that's fine, but I did want to point that out. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions, or motions? All right, item 17, discussion approval of meeting minutes of July 27th.
June 27th.
I'm sorry,
Sure.
June 27th and July 6th. So let's take 17A, the June 27th meetings. Any comments, questions, or motions?
I'll make a motion to approve the June 27th minutes.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Mr. Zoll?
Just that I'm referred to as Mr. Zill under the 19, which still wouldn't put me behind the chair alphabetically, so I just go with my usual surname, I think.
Correct, Mr. Zill.
I'll fix that. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Any other comments? Ms. Brad, all those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
I'll abstain.
Abstain. Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Item 17B, the minutes from July 6th. We have the draft and then a suggested comment, a suggested add from Ms. Musto.
Mr. Chair, I'm fine with the addition that Ms. Musto has added.
So is that a motion?
I'll make a motion to, is it an amendment?
Would we approve the minutes with the amendment?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with the amendment.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
I'll abstain again.
And Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
And Mr. Zulish, yes. Okay. That is item 17. Item 18, the Town Administrator's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The animal shelter access road bids are due tomorrow, August 9th at 2 p.m. I also wanted to let you know, if you haven't seen it, that Milton Station parking lot was repaved by the MBTA. And keeping with MBTA Community's theme, the next information session is on Tuesday next week, August 15th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Tim Zerwinski will also be attending the Warrant Committee meeting next Monday night to give the Warrant Committee a debrief on MBTA Communities as they start preparing for potential fall town meeting beginning December 4th. And Tim did work with Town Clerk Susan Galvin, Town Moderator Bob Hiss to send a written letter notification via email out to all town meeting members to let them know the work the Planning Department is doing, the Planning Board is doing, and about these information sessions and where to find additional information so that town meeting members, if they're not reading up on this, can start doing that now. We had a call with S&P last week, a credit ratings call ahead of issuing some additional short-term interest, short-term debt issuances for the fire station project. That call was held last Monday. S&P did affirm the town's AAA credit rating and assigned their highest rating to the upcoming short-term notes that the town will be issuing, highlighting, as they had done earlier this year in February, the town's budgetary practices, our long track record, our strong reserves, and highlighted the work that's going on in terms of the OPEB trust and the OPEB liability to pay that down. So it's a good report. We'll have it up on the website and share that out to news agencies as well. Lastly, just so you folks know, the oral arguments on the FAA case are scheduled to begin on September 7th at 9:30 via Zoom. And that's all from me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Chair's report, item 19. I just want to reiterate the S&P ratings report. As Mr. Milano pointed out, the town received the highest rating for the bond anticipation notes. That's the SP 1+ rating. At the same time, our highest rating of AAA was affirmed as well. And the outlook, according to SEP of Milton, is stable. The report pointed out the following with respect to our stability. We understand that the town does not plan to use reserves to fund recurring expenses beyond fiscal 2024. Management anticipates asking voters to approve an operating override for fiscal 2025, which would allow the town to raise the tax levy more than the ordinary amount permitted by Commonwealth law and balance the fiscal 2025 budget without one-time funding sources or significant expenditure cuts. Milton's demonstrated track record of overriding the tax levy when needed, most recently in 2017, suggests strong community support in managing budgetary growth and service delivery. Despite its use of fund balance, we believe Milton will maintain generally balanced operations and strong reserves beyond fiscal 2024 due to its predictable revenues, conservative budget practices, and detailed 5-year financial forecasting, reducing expenditures if necessary to maintain the balance. That's what S&P had to say about Milton's finances. Item 20 is... Item is 20. Yes, sorry. Ms. Bradley has pointed out to me, I should mention on the chair's report, a general call for volunteers for boards and committees. We've been trying to get the word out as much as possible on the website, and shame on me for not thinking to mention it. Please, if you're interested in town government, find there's got to be one or more outlets for your interest and your work, and so we look forward to people participating in town government because that participation improves the life for us all, improves transparency, improves our collective work on behalf of the other. Item 20, public comment response. Anything, Ms. Musto?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the individuals who came here tonight to speak. Mark Christo, Maggie Wilson, and Jeff Wilkerson. Appreciate the fact that they came out and came here to let us know their thoughts, so thank you.
Item 21, future meeting dates. Tuesday, August 22nd, Tuesday, September 12th, and Tuesday, September 26th.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Zoll.
Just as a heads up, on Tuesday, September 26th, I will be on my honeymoon. And
so you'll be dialing in.
At the risk of my health and future marriage, I may not be participating in that meeting.
All right. We'll all look forward to your honeymoon.
Thank you.
Any other issues with the future meeting dates? Without objection, we'll defer on items 22, 23, 24, and 25, and 26. Those are future meeting agenda items. I don't see the need for that. And the executive session items. Without objection, we'll defer on those items.
No objection.
We're up to item 27.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Ms. Bradley?
Yes.
Ms. Musto?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Zoll?
Yes.
Mr. Zulish, yes. Thank you all. We are adjourned. We will see you all again on August 22nd for another meeting. Enjoy the next 2 weeks of summer. Thanks. Have a good evening.